Anyway, Shaji sir too has to come.
Okay.
Thomas Saib sir.
Madam, in the correct time in start ചെയ്യുമായിരിക്കും
സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്യാനാണ് ഇരിക്കുന്നത്. ഷാജി സാറും കൂടി ഒന്ന് വന്നു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അപ്പൊ തന്നെ തുടങ്ങാമെന്ന് വിചാരിച്ചിട്ട്. കറക്റ്റ് ടൈമിന് ഇന്നലെ തുടങ്ങി, പക്ഷെ ഇന്ന് പക്ഷെ 16 പേരെ ആയിട്ടുള്ളൂ. ഇന്നിപ്പോ ഞങ്ങള് പ്രോഗ്രാം എല്ലാവർക്കും മെയിൽ അയച്ചിട്ടുണ്ട്. അത് ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഡിസ്കഷന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഒരു ബ്രേക്കപ്പ് റൂം അറേഞ്ച് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ അതില് 5 പേരായിട്ട് ഡിവൈഡ് ചെയ്ത് അതിൽ ഓരോരുത്തരെ പിന്നെ മോഡറേറ്റേഴ്സിനെ അതില് ആക്കിയിട്ട് ഒരു ചെറിയൊരു ഡിസ്കഷൻ, അത് കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് സം ഐഡിയാസ് കമ്മിങ് അപ്പ് ആൻഡ് പൂളിംഗ് ഇറ്റ് ടുഗദർ.
Okay. How do you allocate the moderator and the group? How do you choose? Or how did you choose?
No, that is only random.
Random.
Randomly allocated. That there is no other way. We didn't
Okay.
choose take any other way. But people too, only 16 have joined till now, and of that only for 13 may be the participants. And because they have to do the presentations and all, most of them, I don't know whether
what are they supposed to do in the breakup room?
Breakup room, ഡിസ്കഷൻ ആണ് അതിന്റെ ആ ടോപ്പിക്സില് എന്താണ് ഈ മേഖലയിൽ ചെയ്യാവുന്നത് എന്നുള്ള അവരുടെ ഐഡിയ പൂൾ ചെയ്യാന്നുള്ളത്. അവരിൽ നിന്ന് കുറച്ച് സജഷൻസും ഗൈഡ് ലൈൻസും എന്ത് ചെയ്താൽ നമുക്ക് ഒരു ഡിഫറൻസ് ഉണ്ടാക്കാം, ഓരോ പിന്നെ ഇതിൽ അനുസരിച്ച് ഓരോരുത്തർക്ക് എന്താ ചെയ്യാവുന്നത്. ഷാജി സാറിന്റെ ഒരു അഭിപ്രായത്തിൽ സിസ്റ്റമാറ്റിക് റിവ്യൂസ് ആക്കാം. അങ്ങനെ പല രീതിയിൽ നമുക്കത് മാനേജ് ചെയ്യാലോ. ഏത് രീതിയിൽ മാനേജ് ചെയ്യാനാണ് ഇവര് കൊണ്ടുവരുന്ന ഇവരുടെ സജഷൻസ് പൂൾ ചെയ്യാനാണ് ഇപ്പോ. അതിനുശേഷം അത് വെച്ചിട്ട് നമുക്ക് എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു ഫ്യൂച്ചർ പ്രോഗ്രാമിലേക്ക് പോയിട്ട് നമ്മൾ സൈലന്റ് ആകാനല്ല, എന്തെങ്കിലും ചെയ്യണം എന്ന് തന്നെ വിചാരിച്ചിട്ടാണ്. എന്തെങ്കിലും ഇൻപുട്സ് വരുമെങ്കിൽ, ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ some inputs will be anyway, there will be inputs from the other people too. These people have said to be an interested group in this research. Maybe they are interested, maybe they want to try what is going on. That may be some as yesterday what Dr. Anish was mentioning, really he didn't have the FEP number, so he was not supposed to be in this group. But he mailed to me showing the interest. So I thought, the interested people should be here more than the FEP numbers and such barriers. So I thought those people will be giving some more inputs into the group. That something should be materializing from this discussion. That is what, and it should be coming up with future suggestions too. അതാണ് അതിന്റെ ഉദ്ദേശം. ഷാജി സാറിന് ഞാൻ ഒന്ന് വിളിച്ചു നോക്കട്ടെ.
He was trying to join.
ഷാജി സാർ Good afternoon, sir.
അതെ,
എല്ലാരും
അതെ.
21 പേരെയൊക്കെ ആയിട്ടുള്ളൂ. നമുക്ക് അങ്ങോട്ട്
ആയി മതി.
സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്താല് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു 32 നമ്മുടെ ടൈം.
എന്താ വേണ്ടത്, എങ്ങനെ തുടങ്ങണേ?
നമുക്ക് അങ്ങോട്ട്
ആദ്യം you will start, no? Then Pratap comes
I
only
will
at
start and there
1:45.
is a recap. After that we
Okay.
can go for
You start that.
yeah.
Kichu Nair is there. I don't know whether Pratap is
Pratap sir
coming.
ne
Hello.
kandilla. Is he here?
Yeah. Kichu Nair is here, so that's fine.
He's sir.
Okay, we'll start.
Yeah.
I'll see whether Pratap is coming in or not.
Okay. So the dear participants, welcome back to the second day of our program in aging and public health. Hope you have all enjoyed the sessions yesterday. As we are all running short of time, we can directly start with the session with a recap of yesterday's program. Dr. Anish from Amala Medical College, Thrissur, had volunteered to do the same. I hope Dr. Anish is here. I have seen him.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Anish, please unmute and thank you, Anish, sir, for volunteering. Sir, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. So let's start the day with a recap of events that happened on June 17, 2021. It was the first day of our 2-day workshop come training on aging and public health. The program was inaugurated by Honorable Vice Chancellor Dr. Mohanan Kunnumal. In his address, he emphasized the importance of KUHS taking the lead in improving geriatric care and research in the state and promised to act upon the proposals coming out of this workshop. This was followed by felicitation by Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor Dr. C.P. Vijayan. We had 2 sessions yesterday. The first one was primary healthcare and support systems by Dr. Praveen G. Pai sir. He touched upon the various aspects of primary healthcare and geriatric care and how both needs to come together for an age-friendly health system. The geriatric giants, 3Ds, falls, polypharmacy, etc. were briefly touched upon in his session. He also discuss the voids in geriatric care, like lack of guidelines for hospitalization, the readmission rates, delirium prevention, etc. The second session was about management of chronic diseases and acute emergency by Dr. Balakrishnan Kichu Nair sir. In this session, he discussed the various aspects of acute geriatric care and how multidisciplinary approach was key in achieving goals in geriatric care, citing examples of how redesigning the geriatric floor at his institution brought about huge improvements in outcome. The need for advanced care planning and the various research areas which could be explored in the Indian context were cited. Our moderators were Dr. Shaji sir, Dr. Rajamohan sir, and Dr. Thomas Hyde sir. The sessions were followed by a discussion which focused on de-prescribing, need for like-minded people coming together and forming a lead workforce to take geriatric care and research forward in Kerala. Day 1 came to an end by 4:30 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Anish sir, for the wonderful recap. Now we can go into today's session, systematic reviews. For that, let me formally introduce Dr. Shaji K.S., Dean Research, and he was a professor, Department of Psychiatry, Government Medical College, Thrissur, who is the backbone of this program. To introduce, and he will introduce our speaker, Dr. Pratap Tarian sir. Shaji sir, please.
Just make sure that Pratap is here.
Yeah, I'm here. Shaji, I'm here.
Oh,
Hi.
Pratap.
Here.
Good to see you. Okay, I'm introducing you.
Could you brief, please?
Okay. So, Professor Pratap Tarian is adjunct professor, clinical epidemiology unit, and Professor B.V. Moses Center at Christian Medical College, Vellore. He had been the professor and head of the Department of Psychiatry at CMC Vellore and was the associate director of CMC for some time. I have a very long association with him. Before that, I must say that he is one of the brightest scientists of this country. And we are very proud of people like Pratap, because as some of you would have read in Stanford, when they listed the top 2% of scientists, he was there in that list. I'm very proud to say that we were getting training at the same time at CMC Vellore. Indeed, it was a pleasure to work with him. He had, after his MD, he joined the department. Then he went on to do his fellowship with the Royal College, came back, set up the department, and focused on evidence-based medicine by setting up the Cochrane Center and heading it for quite some time, making it very big. And I also had the good fortune of getting trained under him for 2 days many years back. That was something to do with the systematic review. He is one person who had made a huge difference to health sciences in this country, mental health related knowledge in this country. Dear Dr. Pratap, we are very, very happy to have you, and we would request that you keep in touch in various ways and assist this movement. This is a very humble beginning by Kerala University of Health Sciences to create a platform wherein people who are ready to invest their time and energy could come together and then join hands. And as you had mentioned many a time, we should learn to collaborate and stop competing. And we should do, instead of just doing it, we must start doing it right and appropriately and evidence-based in our healthcare. So I wouldn't take too much of a time. I can assure you that he will be of great help to us, and he is a person who is kind enough to offer long-term help. So we look forward to your presentation and continued support for the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaji. Thank you, Shaji. Can I start?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I first want to express my gratitude for being invited to participate in this event. And many of you may not know, after listening to Shaji, that we had appeared for the MD exam together. He passed, I almost failed. So let's keep that in context. Let me start. So I got this presentation for you. It's a bit of good news and some bad news. And I think both the good news and bad news are all rolled in one. Because normally when we do this sort of presentation, we take 1 week to do that. So today I'm going to try and do it in 2 hours. So it's both good and bad news. It's a fairly detailed introduction to the whole sphere of systematic reviews and meta-analysis. I am not a statistician, but I have been trying to understand and share my knowledge of statistics for clinicians. So there will be a lot of statistics, but from a clinical perspective. And this talk is structured in such a way that every half an hour, I will stop and ask if you have questions about the previous half an hour. And during question time, you're welcome to go and get some coffee or some food or whatever, because it's going to take a lot of detailed attention. I'm happy to answer all the questions, but keep it for those question times. That way the flow gets in short. Okay, all of this in the contents, what I'm trying to do here is, I'm going to first give you practical examples of why is it important to have access to good quality research synthesis in the form of a systematic review or a meta-analysis to inform health decisions. And I do this as an example of trying to get everybody on the same page, but I do not know how much knowledge you have about all these basic issues. So this example will get us all on the same page. The next thing I'll just highlight very briefly, what are the big differences between a systematic review and your traditional review article. The next thing I'll do is I'll go through the steps in some detail of doing a systematic review, or even if you don't do it, at least understand how to read one properly. And for this process, I'll use examples of systematic reviews related to the article. And finally, we'll go through some resources that you might find useful, both to understand and to do systematic. Now, all of this is premised on our understanding of the movement that these two guys and a host of other people around the world started in around 1992. And Dave Sackett and Gordon Guy defined evidence-based medicine as the integration of research evidence, clinical expertise, and patients' values. But for a long time, people understood this to mean that reliable evidence from research is integral to any decision you make. Actually, it's meant to be an alliance where you have good quality research evidence about treatment, prognosis, interventions, and you integrate that with your clinical expertise and also the values and preferences of your patients. That is what this was meant to be. But if you look, it's only at the center of this Venn diagram that you actually are probably practicing evidence-based medicine. So this kind of implies that there is a lot of research out there, but that research is not really meant at improving the lives of our patients. And you will readily agree, most of the time we do research because we have to. We have to pass our exams, we have to get tenure, with all kinds of other reasons. Then the other issue is, as we become clinically more and more experienced, we can very rapidly arrive at a diagnosis and understand risk factors. But unless we keep up to date with current evidence, we may not really be offering the best treatment for our patients. And as far as patients' values and preferences are concerned, most of us don't really believe that our patients actually can make a decision for themselves. And I'm not talking about Kerala. Kerala may be different, but the rest of the country, most of the time patients come and tell you, "You're God, you make the decision for me." So this is the problem that we have here. Now, in this context, the other issue is most of the time, there is good enough reason to believe that a lot of the research evidence out there cannot be trusted because the methods they've used have been unreliable, or the statistics that they have used or reported are either manipulated. And there are a lot of undisclosed conflicts of interest and ghostwriting and all kinds of stuff. So many people don't really trust research. And to add to that, if you look at this article from the Lancet, where Ian Chalmers, who founded the Cochrane collaboration with others, and his colleagues, they looked at published research in high-impact journals, and they classified them into two axes and 4 quadrants. So the Curie quadrant, right up there, is research done to advance the frontiers of basic science knowledge. It's not meant for practical application, but it advances science. At the other end, you have the Dahl quadrant, after Richard Dahl, where it's pure research, but it's applied research that actually makes a practical difference. Then you have a combination of the two, which they call the Pasteur quadrant. And unfortunately, they classified 85% of published research in good journals to be a total waste of time, doesn't apply to people, nor does it advance science. So this is what they call research waste. And you will understand that in conditions where you really need good evidence, you really don't have this evidence. And you have a lot of people's opinions and ideas and political interference. So this is the context in which we are trying to practice. So what we need for better health outcomes is reliable evidence. And this evidence should be relevant. It should be based on a focused clinical question. And you should be able to find studies which address this question using designs and reporting the results in a way that provides reliable answers. And this evidence should be evaluated to see, is it complete? Have we found all the relevant studies or only the ones that were easily available? And have we assessed each study to see, can we trust the results based on the methods? Or if we get all the evidence together and we find a lot of the studies, we cannot trust the results, how can we trust the overall evidence? And the other issue is when you say something works, are we talking about just statistical significance, or are we talking about how clinically useful is it going to be? And finally, the overall evidence, when we synthesize it, we should make sure that we understand that it has this clinical benefit, and this benefit is seen in all the studies, not in some of the studies. And even if you say that the evidence is reliable, and we need to make sure, can we apply it in our setting, the context in which evidence is applied. So this is what we kind of cover today. And to start off, I'd like to just explain that we no longer use the word evidence-based medicine because we believe that evidence may not be there for a lot of conditions. And we believe that even if there's good evidence, You may not be able to afford it. You may not be able to use it. So we say, we look for the evidence and then we make a decision whether we should use the evidence. So the evidence is informing our decision to use or not to use the evidence. And in this process, there are certain things that can help us. Research synthesis, what we're going to talk about today, can help provide reliable evidence so that people can make a decision about whether we should use it or not use it. So research synthesis in this context, we're referring to the process of finding and combining the results of multiple primary studies addressing the same question. And although it seems like secondary research, in many ways, it is aimed at doing exactly the same thing as primary research, which is to advance and provide new knowledge by comparing and combining the results of different studies so we can confirm what we know, or we can say what we thought was true is not true. And we can also see how generalizable these results are. This is where systematic reviews and meta-analysis are placed, because they're the primary tools of research synthesis for knowledge translation. And it can be quantitative, like in meta-analysis, or it can even be qualitative. So we can use both these approaches. And in this review, I'm going to primarily focus on systematic reviews and meta-analysis of studies which are aimed at evaluating the effects of treatments. But I'll briefly touch on the others as well. But first, let's see, is this really useful in life? Because if it cannot help real life problems, we're wasting our time. So the example I've always used in teaching to get people to understand usefulness happened to me when I first came back from Oxford in 95 or 96. A friend of mine whom I had known many years ago called me and said that she needed my help because she'd lost a child in her first delivery, or the child was born premature because of neonatal respiratory distress syndrome. And she's been told by her obstetrician that she's a high-risk pregnancy and she should consider trying a short course of corticosteroids to prevent neonatal death. But she was an educated person and distrusted steroids. So she asked me, can you help? Will it help? Will it harm? So this is where I have to come in. I'm not a neonatologist. So I asked all my professors, and they told me, some said yes, some said no, because at that time it was new knowledge. So then I made a decision that I shall seek the answer for this myself. And I'll go to PubMed. And then I made a decision that before I go to PubMed, I need to be clear about what am I searching for. I need to be clear about what I'm looking for. So this is the first step in trying to find evidence-based answers. To rephrase your question in a way that can actually provide reliable answers. So if I look at my problem and try and rephrase it, I could say the question really is, in mothers at high risk of premature delivery, will a short course of corticosteroids compared to no steroids prevent or reduce neonatal deaths? So what I've done is I've defined my population, my intervention, my comparison, my outcome or outcomes, and the time points. Here I'm said neonatal period, 28 days. But there could be other time points that other outcome may be assessed. Then I have to ask myself, this is the question, that what study design am I looking for that will address this question? So as you know from many websites and series, that the way of looking at the levels of evidence, it can vary, but in general, it's talking about biased evidence and least biased evidence. That means everything is evidence, but the bias is how true can you say this result will be if you take it away from the population it's applied in and try and apply it to other populations. So as you try and take it from a person who improved with the treatment to say everybody should take the treatment, the methods you use should be such that it can really give you answers when you apply it to a large population. So from that point of view, depending on the question you're asking, there is a primary study designed for that question, which, if done properly, gives you the answer that is most likely to be true to answer that question. So as you can see here, for an intervention, which is what I'm interested in, we need a randomized controlled trial. So I looked for randomized controlled trials, and lo and behold, I found one. This was published in Pediatrics in 1972, and this group of authors, Liggins, they're from Auckland. In fact, in Auckland right now, you have the Liggins Institute, named after Liggins. And this was a controlled trial of antepartum glucocorticoid treatment for prevention of respiratory distress syndrome in premature infants. Now, my answer question is, how do I find out whether the results are actually useful? So if you look at the results from this RCT, which took mothers due to deliver preterm and randomized them to get steroids and no steroids, one of their primary outcomes was neonatal death. And in this, the results showed that when they randomized 532 mothers to get steroids, 36 neonates died and 496 did not die. And when they randomized 538 mothers not to get steroids, 60 neonates died and 478 did not die. So there seems to be an apparent difference. Now, is this important, this difference? So usually when you're trying to look and see is this difference important, we rely on what we call the null hypothesis and tests of significance. There we start off by saying there actually is no difference in mortality with steroids or no steroids. And the chi-square test, or the difference in proportions, will tell you whether the observed difference is greater than what you'd expect by chance. There could be a chance that this difference happens, a random error. But you can check from what's expected and what is observed whether this difference exceeds chance or does not exceed chance. And you express this as a p-value. The probability of this difference being or not being due to chance. And we all accept a p-value of less than 0.05 as statistically significant. In fact, all tests of significance depend on this p-value. So we really need to understand, what does this p-value really mean? Basically, it's asking the question, how certain are you that the observed difference in outcomes is due to chance or not? So we get a p-value of 1, we're 100% sure it's largely chance. If we get a p-value of 0, we're 100% sure it's not purely chance. So when you get a p-value of 0.5, it basically means I have no clue. It could be chance, it need not be chance. And when you get a p-value of 0.1, it tells you you're about 90% sure this difference is not due to chance. So a p-value of 0.05 just tells you you're 95% sure this difference is not due to chance. And anything less than that means that you're more than 95% sure this difference is not due to chance. That's what it tells you. Now keep that in mind and look at this. I've got rows and I've got columns. The top and the fourth row are the numbers in a treatment arm and a control arm, and the columns increase the sample size from 5 all the way to 100 in each arm. The next two rows under these tell you the responders and response rate to the treatment and the control arm, and the columns tell you, with increasing sample size, what is the responder number of proportion and the response rate. And if you look at that, you'll see that when you give 5 people treatment, 4 of them responded. 4 by 5, 80% response rate. And in the control arm, it was 2 by 5, it's 40% response rate. And that holds true irrespective of what sample size you take, because that is the actual difference between the treatment and the control. And you can see that the treatment response rate is double that of the control arm. But when you look at the p-values, you'll find that when you only had 5 in each arm, your p-value was 0.29, which means you're about 71% sure this difference is not due to chance. When you go to the third column and look at 15 in each arm, the magic number of 30, which is what we all tell our PG students, 13. What we hear saying is that when you have a 100% difference between treatment and control, you only need 30% people to show that now you're 97% sure this difference is not a chance difference. And when you increase it to 100 in each arm, your p-value is now less than 0.0001, which you will, of course, report as highly significant, and which anybody who reads it will interpret as highly effective. So a p-value of less than 0.001 does not tell you that this treatment is highly effective, because even with a p-value of 0.29, the treatment is highly effective. You could not show. What this p-value of 0.001 tells you is, you are more than 99.9999% sure this difference is not due to chance. I can give you the same p-value, even if the actual difference between two treatments is 1%. All I've got to do is increase sample size. So take a look at this example. I'm showing you the remission rates for two drugs at week 6. Drug A, at week 6, the remission rate was 30.5. The drug B, the remission was 31.5. There's a 1% difference. But if my sample size is large enough, I can get you a p-value of less than 0.001. So this is what we mean by statistically significant results which are not clinically important. So what I'd like to just emphasize here is any difference between two groups can be made to be statistically significant depending on your sample size if you use the p-value hypothesis approach. Because the p-values don't tell you how clinically important the difference is, only if you exceeded chance in this observation. Which is why we have to look at another approach, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with, but I just want to go through it in detail. So when you're estimating the effects, you're looking to see, compared to this treatment and that treatment, what are the effects, relative effects? So that can be looked at in terms of relative risk, which is the risk ratio, which is asking the question, what is the risk of death with steroids? Which is basically how many people given steroids died and how many people not given steroids died. That's the risk of dying with or without steroids. And the ratio of that risk is your risk ratio of 0.61. What does 0.61 mean? It tells you when you look at the chances of dying with or without the treatment, which one is better. So if your risk ratio is 1 or null, no difference, it means that they're both the same. If you phrase your outcome negatively, like death, relapse, not improved, then if your outcome is negative, I mean, it favors less than 1, like 0.42, it favors your experimental intervention. That is, here it is steroids. And if it is 1.42, more than 1, for a negatively phrased outcome, it favors a control intervention. If you change the way you phrase the outcomes, like you now say this is a desirable outcome, like alive, improve, then the interpretation is reversed. Second thing it can tell you is not only which one is better, but how much better. So if you get a relative risk of 0.42, it means the intervention reduces the risk of dying compared to the control by 1 minus 0.42, and you can express it as a percentage. So it's 58% reduction in the risk of death. Or another way of looking at it is 100 minus 42. 58% reduced risk with the treatment compared to the control. And if it is 1.42, it means there is a 42% increased risk with the treatment compared to the control. Right? But because it came from only one experiment, how can you be sure you get the same risk ratio if you were to extend your population? So that's when your confidence interval comes. It gives you, from this data, you can calculate, like a prediction. You can say, I think it will lie, if I were to do this many times, I will get a range of values within which 95% of the time, you can even have 99% confidence intervals, I will find my value within that. So very roughly, it's like you saying, this is my estimate, but there could be a best estimate and a least estimate. So it's a measure of uncertainty. It tells you one trial cannot represent the whole population, but it can be a measure of precision, because if the narrower your confidence size is, it means your population is increased, so you have more confidence in the result being representative of the population. So you get precise confidence intervals with large sample sizes. And if the confidence intervals do not include no effect, that is, if it should not have 1 in it. So 0.5 to 1.25 means it could be a 50% reduction or a 25% increase. That is clinically uncertain, and statistically, automatically, it's not significant. The p-value will be more than 0.05. If your upper and lower limits lie entirely above or below 1, then you're sure it harms or you're sure it helps. And this is clinically important for you as well as statistically significant. The p-value will automatically be less than 0.05. But what is also really important to see, what's the lower limit? That is the limit which is closest to 1. Right? So if it is more than 1, which is the limit closest to 1. If it is less than 1, which is the limit closest to 1. What we want to know is how far away from 1 is that lower limit, your least estimate. So if your least estimate of benefit is 0.73, that's a 27% reduction, which I think is a good reduction. But if the least estimate was 0.99, it is a 1% reduction, which coming from a randomized control trial where you control everything, extrapolating it to everyday life where you control nothing, you probably won't get an effect. So we're looking to see how far away from 1 is our least estimate to say how clinically important do I think this difference is. Right. Then to complicate matters, we have something else called the odds ratio, which is not the same as the risk ratio. Here we're looking at the odds of dying or not dying on steroids, not the proportion who died on steroids. Did you die? Did you not die? 36 by 496. And the odds of death without steroids. So the odds ratio is a different measure and gives you different numbers. They means different things. Okay, the same interpretation for confidence intervals you can have with the odds ratios. Why do we need these two measures? From a mathematical point of view, odds ratios are very bogus. Because if you talk about the odds of death, it's say 36 by 496 instead of steroids, right? And if you say odds of being alive, it is 496 by 36. So it's just a reciprocal. But if you talk about risk, it is different. The risk of death is 36 by 532. The risk of being alive is 496 by 532. It's a different number. So your risk ratio for being alive is not a reciprocal of the risk ratio for being dead. So you have to be careful about that. Odds ratios are more, you can use it for many study designs, RCTs, cohorts, case controls. But risk ratios cannot be used for a case control design. You can only use an odds ratio because the populations that the risks now are measured in are different. They are not the same population. Right. The other thing to keep in mind is when you have very rare outcomes, events are not common, odds ratios and relative risk numerically will be very similar. They may mean different things, but they look similar. But when the event rate increases, say above 20%, then your odds ratios tend to overestimate your effects compared to risk ratio. I'll give you an example. Suppose you have 200 children randomized to drug A or drug B. And if you have rare events are not very common, 4 out of 100 children with drug A died and 6 out of 100 with drug B died, your relative risks and odds ratios are more or less the same. But when the outcomes become more common, now 40% and 60% risk difference, here we find your odds ratio is 0.44, which is more beneficial than your risk ratio of 0.67. So when you're looking at statistics and somebody uses odds ratios, and it's a very common in it, change it to risk ratio and see does the confidence intervals become wider and more conservative. Okay, so that's it. The other important thing is clinicians think like risk ratios. How many patients did I treat? How many did I improve? I don't ask myself how many lived and how many died. It's the same thing, but I think saying what is my success rate, right? So generally, we prefer that people use risk ratios when you're interpreting these results. So let's go back to helping my friend. I'm sure that you all are in the spirit of public health. You want to help my friend. So help me out with this. So I'm looking to see what the risk ratio is, and I can get 0.61. I can look at the risk difference. The risk difference is what is the difference in the risk of dying with and without steroids. That's one risk minus the other. It's called the absolute number, right? One risk minus the other. And if you inverse that, inverse of that risk difference is the number needed to treat to benefit, right? But we also need 95% confidence intervals for these estimates, which I can calculate by using the simple formula, effect size plus minus 1.96. Instead of doing that, I can download this free programmed calculator called CI Calculator XL. So go to some other program and just bung the numbers. 60 neonates died out of 538, not given steroids, control group, and the event rate in the treatment group, and it will give you everything you want. Now, all you need to know is how to interpret. So before my friend calls to ask me, do you want to use steroids? I need to understand what this means. So a risk ratio of 0.61. Basically, we ask ourselves, is this a desirable outcome? Outcome is death. No, we don't want it. So anything less than 1 means steroids are better. Good. How much better? 100 minus 61, 39% reduction. Okay. What is my best estimate? 59%. And my least estimate is 10%. So that's what the Auckland study shows me. Right? That is an effective intervention. And at least I can expect a 10% reduction in the risk of dying if I get steroids. I can also look in the absolute. I express this as how many neonates less will die per 100 deliveries. So if I divide 0.044 by 100, it's 4.4. Round it off, I get 4 less neonatal deaths per 100 with steroids. And do the same for the confidence intervals. It's between 1 to 8 less deaths. And the number needed to treat is the inverse of that is 23. The confidence interval is 12 to 104. Tell me, I would need to treat at least 23 mothers with steroids to prevent 1 neonatal. All of this comes from the same 2 by 2 table, but the second 2 are probably of great importance to policymakers or people who have to invest in this, because they want to know what will my investment give in terms of actual reductions. The risk ratio, clinicians and patients like that, because it tells you what is my risk. Okay. Suppose the risk ratio for death was 0.78. What does this mean? Basically mean the risk of death is reduced by 22%. It could be even better, 34% reduction. It could be worse by 22% increase. So clinically, we do not know what this means, because it could be better or worse. And statistically, it is not significant because it includes no effect. The p-value is more than 0.5. What if the risk ratio was 1.26, 1.06 to 1.3? Here we know that the risk of death is increased, definitely, at least by 6%, if not by 39%. And statistically, it is significant, even though we may not like the answer, because it does not include it. Right, so I hope if you don't get anything else out of today, you may remember how to interpret this. But there's another caveat, relative risk versus absolute effects. Relative risks look very impressive, but they can deceive you, because you can get the relative risk of death of intervention versus control of 2, which means 100% increase of death with intervention. You can get this from comparing 1 out of 10 deaths or 1 out of 20 deaths. Relative risk is 2. But the risk difference, one risk minus the other, is 0.05, which is 5 more deaths per 100. Okay. But I can get the same relative risk of 2 by comparing 1 out of 1,000 deaths versus 1 out of 2,000 deaths. Now here, the risk difference is 5 more deaths per 10,000. You can ask yourself, why is there a big difference? Same relative risk, different absolute difference. The trick is why I've highlighted the risk in the control group. In the first instance, it is 1 out of 20. That's the baseline risk without treatment. It shows that without the treatment, 1 out of 20 will die. In the second example, without the treatment, 1 out of 2,000 will die. That means they don't need your treatment. The risk of dying without treatment is very low. So your baseline risk or a control group risk will determine what the actual benefit you're going to see if you have a good intervention. And if you've got a high baseline risk, you need to treat very few people to see the benefit. When you got a low baseline risk, you need to treat many more people to get a benefit. The number needed to treat reflects the effect of an intervention on the population you're going to use it in. So, NMT can be said, how many people should I treat with drug A instead of drug B before I see one person respond? Number needed to treat to benefit. Or one adverse event, number needed to harm. So if you've got a very small NMT, it tells you that the difference in the effects of the drugs is very large. That's why your NMT becomes small. But it also means that you're using it in a population who actually needs that drug. Okay. So looking at the NMT with our 1% difference example, when 1% difference between antidepressants to NNT is 100. Now, if I find two antidepressants differing by a 10% difference, then my NNT is 10. Okay. So, what is a useful NNT? Anything less than 10 is a good NNT. As you go beyond 10, unless it's one population level intervention which can cause a lot of adverse events, then you can have higher NNTs. Okay, so applying it to clinical practice, if you look at published literature, it tells you that if you want to prevent neuropathy in diabetics by giving them insulin, right, your NNT is around 15. If you want to prevent death after myocardial infarction in short term using streptokinase and aspirin, your NNT is 20. They're all reasonable because these are big public health interventions. But it also depends on your baseline risk. So if you've got a condition like hypertension, where you're treating people with a high baseline risk because their blood pressure is high, diastolic blood pressure is high, compared to when it's low, using antihypertensives to prevent fatal outcomes or morbidity, the difference is obvious. When you have a higher baseline risk, your NNT is low. So this is the problem when we start relaxing our guidelines for saying pre-hypertension, pre-diabetes, and start treating using the drugs and treatments that we use for the actual condition. Many people don't benefit. So summarizing this section, p-values only tell you what are the observed differences, and it doesn't tell you from a chance perspective and not how clinically important. So we would like to know things like relative measures. So what is the actual difference in the treatment between two drugs? And then the absolute benefit, which is what is the effect of that treatment on the population that you're treating? Right. So the relative measure talks about the power of the difference of the drug. The absolute benefit depends on which population you give it to. If you give it to a low-risk population, a very effective intervention, very few people will benefit. If you give a high-risk population the same effective intervention, more people will benefit. You need the confidence intervals. And if it does not include 1, or if it's a continuous measure, it's not 1, 0, then it's a statistically significant difference. And if it includes 1, then it's not a statistically significant difference. And the further away from on the lower limit, the more likely you will see a clinically appreciable effect. But the problem is, we all need to know for our own outcomes, what would be the minimum important difference that we want to see. So we're moving away from p-values. We're moving away to say, at the very least, I'd like to see this much different before I change my practice. Okay, I'll stop here and take questions. Any questions on what I've covered so far? Because I have to now tell my friend what to do. So before that, let's say whether he understood all this.
So,
Anybody?
question time, please.
You don't have to ask. You can always ask later. But if you have any burning questions, because I'll cover all this. By the time you finish, it'll be coming through your ears. Okay, I'll carry on there. Now the thing is, we now need to move from just finding the evidence. We want to know what to do for my friend who is making paused. Right. So what I want to know is, the summary is this. Question now is moving from evidence to practice. I'm using a clinical example to extrapolate what we will actually do in EBM. Okay. Shall I tell my friend to use steroids? Because I've got a risk ratio which is useful. What do you think? Subhadra madam, shall I tell my friend to use steroids? You could consider that, but before you do that, you have to ask yourself, okay, I know the evidence is showing it works, but next question is, can I trust the evidence? How do I know it's not pure rubbish? So that's called internal validity. How true are the results of this paper? Internal validity is the same wherever anybody in the world is reading that article. The truth is the same from that paper. External validity is, can I use the evidence? And that external validity will change depending on where you're going to use it. So we need to now first know, before I can tell my friend, how true are these results likely to be? And this is where this picture is very priceless. So we are seeing a picture from this view. After having seen this picture from this view, we will realize that the people coming from the traffic light towards these three, without seeing this view, will have a different view of what's going on. So you could excuse them if the guys coming from front thought exactly the same as the guy in the middle thinks. Because the guy in the middle thinks that he's such a hot shot. He's writing a book. And the title of the book is 7 Habits of Highly Successful and Popular People Who Are Also Very Sensitive Boyfriends. Now, we know that's probably not true. But he doesn't know that. Why? Because he represents bias. The method he is using to come to this conclusion is wrong. What is his method? She's coming out with me, he's coming out with me, I'm a hotshot. Right? So inherently he thinks he's a hotshot, and this is confirmation bias. What's happening confirms his viewpoint. Right? So whenever you read a paper, you must be aware of bias. Next thing you have to ask yourself is what causes bias to actually give you wrong results? The real reason why is he going out is probably different. Right? The girl may be thinking, and as we are psychiatrists, we can all read people's minds. So it's easy to understand what she's saying. He doesn't know what I want. He's only bothered about himself. Selfish fellow. His friend is so sensitive. He listens to what I say. He's a good chap. I want to talk to him. So what does make this friend? The outcome is going out together. What does it make the friend? He's a confounder. Right. So the real reason why she's going out with this guy in the center is through him, she has a non-controversial way of talking to this chap who's a sweet fellow. Right. So bias and confounders are sometimes the reasons why we think we've got the wrong, a particular result which is not the true result. The other example I often use is this one. This is shot off the coast of Queensland. 2 surfers, every day you'll find them there. On that particular day, there was a whole school of dolphins surfing towards them. When I saw this, I thought to myself, how in the world did they take this picture? Does it happen every day? Is it a coincidence? Or is it a Photoshop image? So what we have to keep in mind is when you're talking about internal validity, we have to be careful of anything which will give us a wrong answer. And the 2 major reasons are systematic errors or bias, which includes confounders and stuff, or random errors, chance. We've spent the first half an hour talking about how to detect the effects of chance. That's very easy now. But bias cannot be detected by p-values. You need to know what are the methods of each study, particular study, that can cause wrong results. Right. So fortunately for randomized controlled trials, there is empirical evidence from research which tells you that if the method of randomizing your selection, your code, does not give you equal samples where the confounders are balanced. The reason of randomization is to ensure that your confounders are balanced at the start of the trial, so they don't influence the outcome. But when you're talking about randomization, you're also talking about being unpredictable. That means whoever is allotting participants should not be aware of the randomization sequence. That's called concealment of allocations. These 2 things should be described. Otherwise, the person who's got the randomization code say, okay, you take this, can change the randomization code depending on what they would like. That should not happen. So the method of concealing allocation has been shown to be perhaps the most important part of a randomized control trial and can inflate your results by up to 40% if you don't do it properly. So your baseline confounders are unbalanced. So similarly, there are various things that we have to worry about, which we will talk about later also, which can give you wrong results. Right? And these are very specific chapters in this whole process of systematic reviewing, which we have to master to be able to assess the risk of bias in every trial. And allocation concealment is not the same as blinding. Allocation concealment occurs before you start the experiment. And blinding occurs after people start taking treatment so that they don't know what they take. No one should know. right? Without allocation concealment, you cannot blind. And even if you cannot blind, you can always conceal allocation, like in surgical trials. The surgeon has no choice in saying which patient I'm going to operate. When he goes to the operation theater, there is a serially stacked sealed envelope list with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Inside that envelope, there is an operation which he should do. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. Right? So he cannot select. That's linked to the randomization. He'll open it, he has to operate. If you give him a choice, he'll say, I don't want that obese woman, I don't want this person. Not at all. So these are important things to keep in mind to understand how to assess risk of bias for every study design. Fortunately for me, Liggins was free of bias. So now, I definitely now know that this intervention is useful, the outcome is very important for my patient, and I can trust the results. Now can I give steroids? Smart people will say there's a lot of space in this slide, so there may be other reasons also. But think clinically. In a clinical practice, what would you do? I know this is a good intervention, very important outcome. I know the result can be trusted. There are many other questions you'll ask. No? They'll say this trial was done in New Zealand. How do you know it will work in India? So the question is there any biological reason to think it will not work? I can't think of any. But I must think in terms of health systems also. This is done in a high-income country. Hygienic practices are good. I have to ask myself, will safety be compromised? Right, the paper did not report any problems, but I know that steroids could theoretically cause sepsis in people. And if you deliver in an unhygienic circumstance, you could get puerperal sepsis. So if I'm going to use it, I'll have to tell my friend, and she probably will also deliver under hygienic circumstances, so that the risk-benefit ratio can be assured. Is it affordable? Very cheap. Is it available? Over the counter without a prescription? Is it practical to take? So these are all the questions we have to ask. Are there any other alternatives? After having asked all these questions, then we will discuss this with my friend and ask her what is her preference. Her preference can only be made after we've been through all the evidence. Now can I give? Anybody? Shall I give steroids? One last question. How do you know you have all the evidence? I got one trial. Life is never the same. I'm going to show you two trials. I'm showing it to you graphically. The first trial is Liggins. That vertical line in the middle is the line of no difference. Anything less than 1 favors steroids, right? The 0.61 is that dark blob in the center. The horizontal line is the width of the confidence interval. So you can clearly look at it and say, Liggins says steroids reduce risk of death. But I found another trial, same PICO, smaller sample size, wider confidence interval, which now includes the increased risk of dying, 124% increase, 2 times increased risk of death. So around this time is when I came across the logo of the Cochrane collaboration, which is one of the center is one of their earlier results of their systematic reviews. Right, they were systematic in their methods and they found 7 trials of steroids versus no steroids. Liggins is one of the trials which favored steroids. They found another one which favors steroids. 5 trials showed no significant difference, may harm. Right, now if you look at it traditionally, in a democratic country like India, they will say 5 trials versus 2 trials. And some people will say 5 trials is more than 2, give. Other people will say, hey, 2 trials were large trials, man. And then I'll ask you the same question. If you want to give it to your sister, what will you do? Then people will say, oh, I don't know. The method of vote counting doesn't give you a good answer because we forget that the 2 trials had large sample sizes. And if you use vote counting, they are negated by the small trial, which has wide confidence. So we have to pool the results of all these trials together. And when you're pooling it, you're giving more weight to the larger trials. And so the pooled result is more representative of all the trials that you've done and gives you a clear result that steroids saves lives. Right, so I had no problem telling my friend, please consider using steroids. This is the evidence. So I want to see, is it likely to be still true? Now there are many updates. I'm just using an update I found some time ago. And I looked and found with 21 studies now, of the same Cochrane review, I had a lot more results than I thought. I now know puerperal sex is my mother won't die, and I'm more confident of the results of antenatal steroid because the lower limit of the confidence interval is now 0.81. Not very different from ligands, but because there are more studies, confidence intervals are more narrow and precise. But what's more important, I've got many more outputs from that systematic. For each trial, we look at different things, and the review authors asking more questions. Does it do this? Does it do that? What I want you all to take away from here is a very quick way of telling me, are all these results statistically as well as clinically important? So very simple. You should be able to do it once again. First one, RDS. RDS is an undesirable outcome. Anything less than 1 means steroids are better. 0.66 means there's a 34% reduction. The very least, I expect 0.73, which is a 27% reduction, which I'm happy with. It doesn't include 1, so it is statistically and clinically important. And if you go down each one of them, cerebroventricular hemorrhage, least estimate is 20 something, 29, 30%. Next one, necrotizing, at least 26% reduction. I'm happy with that. But when I come to the next one, respiratory support intensive care admission, my estimate itself is 0.8, which means 20% reduction. My least estimate is 1%. But it's a small, comes only from 2 small studies. So this is statistically significant because it doesn't include 1, but I am not so confident about how useful clinically because the lower limit could be a non-clinically appreciable outcome. And the last one, systemic infections, 0.85 is a 15% reduction. It depends on what value I give to a 15% reduction in systemic infections. If I say that's a serious problem for kids, I'm happy with at least a 15% reduction because I have no other choice, then that's clinically useful. So we have to set that lower limit in our mind for all the work that we do. So we are moving from that real life example where you can use evidence to make clinical decisions to make policy decisions. And for this, we use systematic reviews, but we then summarize the findings in a user-friendly way, which policymakers and non-researchers can understand, right? So we're taking the best evidence for that from systematic reviews of the primary design. That gives you the best chance of getting unbiased evidence. So what exactly is a systematic review? It's not the same as a meta-analysis. A systematic review is much larger than a meta-analysis. People often say meta-analysis, but if they don't do it in systematic review, it's probably worthless. A systematic review is a scientific approach in the way you're reviewing articles, in the way you frame your question, in the way you conduct your search, get your results, and make sure that you get a reliable answer. If you have data which is comparable, you can do a meta-analysis. And you need at least data from 2 studies to do a meta-analysis. Okay? So the meta-analysis is only the statistical method that combines the results of several studies to answer, on average, across the studies, how is intervention A compared to intervention B? An average result, right? But when you're doing the average, some studies you have more weight than others. I'll tell you how to do that. The main advantage is because you've got a lot more power, sample size increases, you're likely to get precise results which can give you resolve controversies, right? But if you do a meta-analysis outside a systematic review, you can get wrong results. Primarily because 1, you may not have actually searched all the areas where you can find all the relevant trials. And you will only use trials that you can easily find. And the reason you can easily find them is because they most likely have positive results. That's why they get published. That's why they get published in journals which are indexed in PubMed. So the negative study results may not be published, or if they publish in journals not indexed in those databases, and no drug rep is going to come and give you the results of negative studies. So if you pool results of easily obtained studies, you'll get positive results. Unless you put all the results together, you will not get a balanced result. Then if you do a meta-analysis without seeing how the individual studies' biases influence the results, your result may be biased as well. And finally, when you're looking at your results and you're saying on average this is the way the drug works, is it working the same way in all the trials? If you're saying it's an average, then all the trials should show the same thing. So we have to assess, is there inconsistency or heterogeneity in the studies? And finally, the results of the review, do they apply to us? All this needs to be looked at. How generalizable are the results? Right. So the way this differs from a traditional review article is multiple. First of all, review articles are trying to give you state of the art. Systematic reviews answer focused questions. Most important, general review articles do not have a method section, whereas systematic reviews have a protocol, which, like in Cochrane, they are peer reviewed before they're published. And a published protocol is a record of what you said you will do to compare with what you actually did. And even if you do a non-Cochrane review, doing a review for any journal, you're encouraged to register the review in a website called Prospero. The protocol should be registered, right? The next thing is that research in a systematic review is very comprehensive, multiple databases, no language restrictions, right? And the methods are clearly described in the protocol. What kind of studies will you select? Which will you exclude? What search terms? What databases? And when you start reporting it, you will say which of the studies we excluded and why did we exclude it, right? And when we are deciding which studies to include, for intervention, we generally include only randomized trials, or if randomized trials are not possible, then very specified kinds of observational studies. And we don't pool all designs together. They're analyzed separately, and we assess risk of bias in every study. And we don't worry about p-values. We only look at the effect estimates and confidence intervals. And vote counting we don't use, we give weighted pool analysis. The other issue is that, because we are doing a quantitative synthesis, we can give precise results. And our attempt to improve bias, we have at least two people doing the review independently throughout. So your author team should not be influenced by one senior author telling the junior author what to do. They should be independent assessments. And finally, when we give you our results, we're telling you this is the outcome, this is a numerical result, this is the absolute benefit, and we also give you a judgment. This is our confidence in that result. So we link our confidence in that estimate as likely to be true, which you will not find in regular review articles. Cochrane reviews are regularly updated, and there are many standards we have to follow. PRISMA standards, internal standards. So the end result is, because the process is so structured, when you say review articles can be influential, yeah, traditional review articles can be influential, it depends on who's doing it. Whereas good systematic reviews are influential because the methods are good, right? More important, what happens if you don't do this? This is an example, which is a classic. If you look to the left of the line, you see a forest of lines. It's basically a forest plot representing the odds ratios and 95% confidence intervals of 33 trials, which randomized around 36,000 patients in all, over a 30-year period to get IV streptokinase or no streptokinase to prevent death after myocardial infarction. 6 trials clearly showed benefit. The others were too small, they were all over the place. But the pooled estimate clearly told you streptokinase saved lives. So the authors of this piece, Joseph Lau and others, said, did we require 33 trials, 36,000 patients, and 30 years to come to this answer? Could we not have known this earlier? So they took the first trial and pooled it to the second trial, and kept pooling each trial to see when could we have known. And they showed that by 1973, only after randomizing 2,400 patients, we could have known that streptokinase saved lives. But we went on and did GC, ISIS, huge numbers of patients randomized. Now, if you had been in the IRB ethics committee in 1973 and you had proved the results and ISIS and GC had come for permission, the chances you would never have allowed them to go ahead, because there's a good chance you're increasing the risk of death in participants. So why we were killing people in research? Because we weren't looking at cumulative evidence. What are we doing in the real world? All our expert recommendations, none of them were recommending thrombolytics until late in the, very late. So at the same time, what were we recommending? Treatments which are likely not to help. Increasing evidence that lidocaine doesn't help, but we were prescribing. So this was an editorial which really started the evidence-based medicine movement. It said advice on some life-saving therapies have been delayed for more than a decade, while other treatments have been recommended long after controlled research has shown them to be harmful. So that is why we need this process, right? And so if you look at what we are trying to do is we are using explicit systematic methods to minimize bias in the identification, selection, and summary of studies. And we need to have clear objectives and methodology, a transparent search attempt that could look at all the trials that would satisfy criteria, and a method of looking at the validity of the methods of the studies and the results, and also in the cumulative estimates. And a presentation which is systematic, which describes everything. So transparency and accuracy and restricting bias, right? So systematic reviews need not contain a meta-analysis. If it does, it could be useful. So what are the steps? If you want to do one, you first need to justify what is the need for. Are there not other systematic reviews? So if you do find one, then you assess and see whether it addresses what you are trying to assess. Is there a recent search date? Or if it's an old search date, are you aware of more trials that have happened since then? Right? And if they, whatever methods they use, there's an instrument called AmStar2, which I'll show you the link to, which tells you how to look at a systematic review and see how good it is. Because if it's done badly, you can always improve on it. So if you feel a new systematic review is required, then you look at the next. Otherwise, that will answer your question. If you find a new, or you can summarize the result of that systematic review and disseminate it because people may not know the results. These are ways that you can look there. So where do you look for systematic reviews? You can use a PubMed using a filter for systematic reviews. The Cochrane Library has systematic reviews, and through the Cochrane Library you can access another database called Epistemonikos. Then there's the Joanna Briggs Institute's database, and look for ongoing systematic reviews because these are reviews in progress, right? And there's a TRIP database, and I'll briefly show you all of them. So I went to PubMed and I just typed in depression and elderly. And I applied a filter systematic review, which you can get on the left-hand side if you scroll down. It looks at RCTs and all. It's a systematic review. And I found 1,473 systematic reviews using the two terms. And if you scroll down a little bit, I found this one. This is an interesting one. So I give you an idea as to what are the kind of systematic reviews among the elderly which are available. This is a meta-analysis systematic review done from India, looking at the prevalence of depression among elderly people in India, 1997 to 2016. And they did very good methods. You can download it and read it. But from the articles published, there are 51 studies, and the pooled prevalence of depression was 34.4%, ranging from 29.3 to 39.7. And they found within the subgroups, they found that higher among women, higher in rural populations, and in the eastern parts of the country. And also higher if you use non-probability sampling, and if you use the geriatric depression scale, and if you use a particular screening tool. All those studies show a higher prevalence. And just reducing the sample size, looking at studies which are not done well, which is what is called a sensitivity analysis. I've got a result, and if I look only at high quality studies or large studies, low studies, does it change my result? How sensitive are my results to the way I'm doing the review? So it didn't make a difference. And studies that excluded dementia before assessment of depression had lower prevalence. So that's one way you can use a systematic prevalence. Here what he's done is he used a software called Stata. It's a very versatile software. And what you're seeing, the red line in the middle dotted line is the pooled estimate from all the studies, right? And at the bottom, you see the prevalence axis ranging from 0% prevalence to 100% prevalence. And that pooled estimate comes somewhere around the 34% mark, right? But if you look at the individual studies, that's what the first line is talking about, significant heterogeneity between studies. Some first study is saying the prevalence is somewhere 14%, 7.9 to 24. And if you look at the third and fourth study, we're seeing 79%. So they are not anywhere near that average effect. So this is what we mean by heterogeneity. I'll talk about it later in more detail. And so this is how that software is used to just pool prevalence. There's only one group here. What is the estimate and what is the confidence interval for that estimate is what is pooled. I found another one from PubMed. Risk factors and protective factors of depression in older people, a systematic review, right? So when you're doing stuff like risk factors and all, it's good to start off in your background with a kind of a logic frame, logic diagram. That means you're trying to see what is conceptually all the factors that can influence depression in the elderly. So it's a nice, elegant looking at saying there are biological and neuromorphological factors, as well as genetic factors, and a lot of other factors which all interact both ways and can cause depression and can influence depression. And that can also influence life stresses and be influenced by life stresses. So when you put all these things together, when you start searching and decide how I want to analyze my results, you will have some structure. So it's always good to think through what are you trying to do. So in this particular result, there was no meta-analysis. They found studies which had looked at risk factors. And they looked at any factor in that study which has a risk factor of 1, if the confidence intervals for the odds ratio was above 1. That is, the lower limit also should not include 1. And it's protective if the confidence lower limit is less than, right? And if it doesn't, if it crosses over, it's considered to be non-significant. So based on that, they did a narrative synthesis of what could be all the risk factors and how they can work, right? So you can do this as an example of how you can use risk factors in a systematic. This is another interesting one in Cambridge and psychiatry, looking at the phenomenology of depression in older compared to younger adults. So looking to see, is there some way we can differentiate older and younger depressive people from their symptoms? And what they looked at is that they looked for studies in the common databases, which should have looked at every single item of the 17, 21 or 24 item version of the Hamilton scale and given you results for that between older and younger adults. And they took those 11 papers which described it and pooled the results. And what they showed was older depressed adults showed more agitation, hypochondriasis, and somatic symptoms, but less guilt and loss of sexual interest, which I think is what we all seem to know, but they kind of showed it in a statistical manner. So here what they've done is every single line hypochondriasis, they compared separately in the meta-analysis and showed it to be more in favor of. So every item was individually meta-analyzed and the pooled estimates they put together. And it shows that if you look at the line of no difference, things on this side which do not cross 1 tend to favor older people, the symptoms. And things on this side which do not cross 1 is guilt and sexual interest. That's how they came to that conclusion. This is the way in which they use machine learning for phenomenological data. So now I'm moving to interventions, and the favorite go-to place is the Cochrane Library, which you can access online. Just type the Cochrane Library. And the kind of reviews you get there are intervention reviews, diagnostic accuracy reviews, looking to see accuracy of tests, methodology reviews, like I told you, what is the importance of randomization. There are reviews assessing every aspect of doing scientific stuff. The qualitative research synthesis and reviews addressing prognosis across all disciplines, all medical conditions. And right now there are about 8,600 Cochrane reviews and 2,400 protocols of published protocols of reviews in progress. So you can browse the Cochrane Library by topic. So you can look at all the topics and then look at the topic to see what reviews there are in the topic. And if you look at the list of conditions that older people have and match them with the list of conditions, there are a lot of areas where you could potentially find reviews relevant to health system problems in older people. Or you can browse by review group. So these are the groups doing specific reviews. Here too, you can look at all the groups and click on one of them to see what are their reviews. Like for example, the stroke group has got stuff here. There's an incontinence group. There's a epilepsy group. There's all kinds of groups that are related to old age problems. Or you can just do a simple search. Here I did depression and elderly, and I found 14 systematic reviews which use the word depression and elderly. There are 4,120 clinical trials in the clinical trial database here. And if I look at those depression, I can see what kind of reviews are there in terms of, depression and fear. Here I typed in the word dementia, because we know that delirium, depression, dementia are things that we all want to talk about. Dementia, there are 202 Cochrane reviews, 13,000 trials and stuff. And if you look down the reviews, and many of them are intervention reviews. But if you look here, it tells you there are 177 intervention reviews, 23 diagnostic reviews. So these three, for example, are diagnostic reviews using complicated technology. But there are other diagnostic reviews looking at cognitive screening in a community setting, mild impairment, primary care setting, secondary care setting. So it's worth going through all of these. And you'll see also the date of publication and whether it's free access. The Cochrane Library is no longer free to use in India. When we were around, we managed to bargain with the ICMR, but now we have no influence. So, but there are many reviews which are free access. You can look at it, which means you can download the entire review. Here, if you look at delirium, there are 35 Cochrane reviews looking at delirium, right? And you'll find, yesterday we heard about using melatonin. For example, interventions to prevent, melatonin is one of the things mentioned there, but I think the review that was mentioned yesterday has much more recent search, so it's worth reading that as well. I looked at depression in the elderly, and also showing you another database called Epistemonikos. You can access that. Here you have 402 reviews on depression in the elderly. It takes you to a site outside Cochrane, and the kind of reviews done are general, much larger, broader, scope, right? And then if you look at the health systems evidence from the Cochrane Library, there were 29 reviews, and these are also looking at health systems kind of stuff, not clinical things, but what about organizing health systems? That could be another place you can look for public health reviews related to the elderly, like falls and things of that sort. The Joanna Briggs database is from Australia. They have a lot of stuff. You can look at the menus there and check. I found 7 reviews on depression in the elderly. And this is the Prospero website where you register your trials for systematic reviews. Depression in the elderly, there are 22 ongoing, systematic reviews on depression in the elderly. The Flip database, actually with the systematic review filter, has 2,179 results, but not all of them will be systematic reviews. It gives you a lot of articles. So those are places where you can decide, do I want to do a systematic? Once you decide that, you have to write your protocol. Apart from your aims and your PICO, you also have to write how will you locate studies, how will you assess risk of bias, all these things which are actually part of the review process has to be mentioned in your protocol saying this is what I'm going to do for all of that, right? So that's how systematic reviews get done. So today I'm going to show you a resource which I encourage you to download because it's free for the time being. You just type in the word Redman 5 and it will take you to this website. And you can download a software. You can also access the handbook of how to do systematic reviews, which is actually the most important resource for anybody interested in doing systematic reviews. You can also download it from the help file of the program, Redman. Please download that program. It's very user-friendly. And it's got a tutorial which teaches you how to use the program as well, right? So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to look for a review to look at as an example of how to do it. So I went and typed in depression and dementia. There are 40 reviews, but I found one relatively recent one, 18, on a simple topic, antidepressants for treating dementia, depression and dementia, and it's free access. So I opened it. This is the HTML version, which you'll find on the, you can read this version, or because it's free access, you can download the full content PDF. It's about 75 pages, keep it on your computer. Or if you go back to the same HTML version and scroll down, and if you already have downloaded Redman on your computer, you can download statistical data. This review statistical data you can download on your computer. It will open in your Redman program. It's a virtually empty file except for the title and the authors and the studies, references, and the analysis. It's got no text. But it gives you a good idea what should go into a Cochrane review. The authors of that published review started with this blank screen. So you have to write in the background. What is dementia? How much depression is there? That kind of stuff. A description of the intervention. What are all the treatments used for depression in dementia? And how well do they work? And what are you trying to look at here? And why is it important to do this review? So you can say there was a previous review, but it didn't have much trials. And now these are the reasons, a lot of uncertainty. And the individual trials are too small. So we thought we'll do this. This is the exam. This is the justification given in this review. Then you have to write in your objectives, methods, all that stuff, your PICO. So their objectives were to determine the safety and efficacy of any type of antidepressants for patients who have been diagnosed or having dementia of any type, along with depression, provided they are defined by recognized criteria. So it's a very general, open topic. And they have to define their PICO and their study design, right? So their PICO, there are primary outcomes also. Here were all RCTs which are placebo-controlled. And it should be longer than 4 weeks duration because they won't measure outcomes. And if they did not describe their allocation and all, they've excluded. So they're very strict. Most people will say anything described as randomized, we will assess risk of bias. Here they're saying if it is not done properly, the allocation consuming, we will exclude it. Then the next inclusion criteria by a certain criteria. They've given the criteria they'll accept and any age and sex. And the exclusion criteria, they give specific which studies. So we're talking about not patients, we're talking about the papers about patients that they will include and they will exclude. And the kind of interventions, the paper should have described any antidepressant compared to placebo. Dose was not important. And they excluded papers which are used looking at something else apart from antidepressants. And the outcomes of interest, their primary outcome was the effect of depression rated by rating scales and by response rate or remission. They've left the definition of what response and remission is to the paper, provided they use some criteria. They also had secondary outcomes. So generally, you'll find these outcomes will be efficacy and safety as well. So we've got a safety outcome here, right? So the search methods, electronic searches and other resources. So it depends on how nicely you frame your question to get the most relevant studies. So generally, Cochrane searches in lots and lots of places for studies to make sure that you've got published, unpublished, as well as ongoing trials. Very comprehensive. So this review described the electronic searches, saying all the names for the antidepressant we were searching for. They've got a very good specialized register, this dementia group, which regularly searches all other bases. Right, so they're up to date. They only have to search this one. And the details of that are given here. And they also talk to some experts and stuff. And they give you all the terms in their appendix, right? Then we have to write things like, how are we going to select the studies? 2 people have to do it. What will we do? So all of this stuff is written in the review, which we have to write here. What are the methods we're planning to do? And how will we assess risk of bias? So discuss those issues. There is now a new tool for the risk of bias that Cochrane requires you to use. It is there in the handbook itself. And that tells you how to use risk of bias appropriately. So and then you have to talk about, you get your results published. And this is where you start doing the actual review. After the protocol is finished and accepted and you registered it or published it, then you start the search. And depending on what you find, you start writing your results. And the first part of the systematic review results section is a qualitative description of what you found. What studies were, included, excluded, what kind of studies, what did they do, what is the risk of bias, everything. You start with a flow diagram. Here it's an update, right? So the earlier version, they had 7 trials. And on the right-hand side, they're talking about all the things they do. Just like you do for a randomized trial, the consort diagram, this is the Prisma flow diagram. So at the end of this, now they ended up with 10 RCTs in the qualitative synthesis, but only 8 of them gave them data to include in quantitative synthesis. So they describe all of that in included studies. they have a table of excluded studies and the reasons for exclusion, with a reference list to all the studies that they did not include and why they didn't include. And when they enter the references to the included studies, they remember that this is a study linked register, which means if one study was done and he has 4 publications, all those publications are linked under this one reference. The people don't mistake them for different studies. They're study linked registers. The moment you enter the reference, it opens up a table for the study, where you have to write all the stuff for methods, participants, interventions, and a risk of bias table for that study. So this is the published version of what was written in that red map. Methods, participants, interventions, outcomes, notes. And the risk of bias assessment, you have to make a judgment based on some data and say low risk, high risk, what are the reasons? So it can tell you why. Why am I considering this high risk? Why am I considering this low risk or unclear risk? Once you finish that, the program allows you to summarize all of this. So you can create a figure automatically, which tells you across all the studies, how many were high risk, low risk, and unclear risk, and on each domain, how many what were these. These are very useful for you to look at when you look at the final result. How good were this result, the study is contributing to that result. So then the next steps are to start doing the meta-analysis. So this is where I will take a break and ask you, do you have any questions so far? Any questions? I've talked right now about the systematic review part of it.
So
I have to move over to the meta-analysis. So
just one second. Subhadra,
Yes,
what
sir.
time?
you want to take a break?
No.
It's now 2:58.
Yeah.
No, there is time. We have time till 3:45.
So if you want to take a 10-minute break, 5-minute break and come back, I'm fine with that. People want to go
I
take
think
some water.
those who want to take break can take, but then we might want
Those who want to ask questions can ask questions.
comments maybe for 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
Because I think I will start this by saying that the whole idea of this program is to encourage people who are passionate about doing research to conduct good reviews of various nature. You said about narrative reviews, how they are different from systematic reviews. But I think the point which is being highlighted repeatedly is that you have to have a methodology.
Yep.
Reviewing first thing, and before that you should have a very clear-cut question which has to be answered through this very elaborate process of systematic review with or without meta-analysis. So I just want to inform everyone, especially those who are rather new to very serious research, that this is indeed complex, but then complexity cannot be wished away. If you want to meet global benchmarks for distilling or finding out evidence, you will have to be very systematic about it. And once you do that, you put it in public domain, and then people start looking at whether the systematic review indeed was well done, whether there are faults. And so what Pratap had been trying to tell us was that there is an elaborate process which cannot be, you can't skip that. But then most of us, beginners and people who had just started doing thesis, would be very familiar with very general reviews, narrative reviews, scoping reviews, or things like that. But then before I attended this training with Pratap many years back, I really did not appreciate the need for this kind of meticulous approach. So I'm sure our attempt from Kerala University of Health Sciences is to impress upon all of you, all the delegates, especially those who are rather new to research, the importance of being very meticulous so that you get it right. And then you know how you analyze this. So I would want brief comments in another 5 minutes from something related to this from Kichu Nair, Thomas Ipe, and very brief, of course. This is more like a break before Pratap completes his later part. Kichu Nair, you want to, obviously this is lots of, this included lots of fundamental things about systematic review, but then we need to also see this in the perspective of the kind of mission which we are proposing to take up, namely what works for older people, what will harm older people, and how we could change practice more towards informed healthcare, evidence-informed healthcare. Kichu Nair, sir?
Oh, well, I agree with what you just said. Research is all about looking after patients and getting better outcome for the individual patient and the population. And without, collecting, looking at all the evidence, analyzing it and coming to a conclusion, we can't do that. And the good example was we know everybody gets a thrombolytic treatment now in the myocardial infarction. But, as we heard in the first few trials, one was especially from Sydney too, so there's no benefit in doing it unless somebody went and looked at the systematic review and meta-analysis. We would have been, years behind getting treatment for people and saving lives. So I think it's an important area to look into. And Archie Cochrane first said, when you look at he was asked, what proportion of what we do is like 10%, less than 10%. So we need to translate that 10% into 90% or 100%. So that's why this sort of work will come handy.
Pratap, is it okay for another 5 minutes in this kind of comment?
Sure, no problem. What I personally feel is that, what if this is new to young people? The only real way to get comfortable with it is to read as many systematic reviews as possible, looking for areas that you're interested in. After you start reading them and, understanding them, you'll find that this makes eminent sense to you. And you'll be able to actually criticize this review, saying, he didn't look at this, he didn't look at that. So it's a process of actually practicing. And I'm trying to give you the concepts. I'm quite happy to share these slides with you so that you can go back and look at it. The handbook is extremely useful, that you can actually understand this a lot better, so that every postgraduate should know in his area what are the systematic reviews and what do they tell me. In the Royal College, if you go for any exam, they will ask you, what is the Cochrane review tell you about this? You should know, you should have read it. So I think that you should be doing journal clubs. Look for public health systematic reviews of relevance. You should be doing journal clubs routinely. In CMC, every department does journal club using systematic, at least one a month, so that the PGs really know how to interpret a systematic. Right now, we've got a good bunch of postgraduates sitting and extracting data from systematic reviews to come up with COVID guidelines for India, primarily for this institution. So I think an entire generation of students need to be trained to think like this. And it's possible. So we'll be very happy to help you with this.
I think, Professor Rajmohan, I think this is the kind of change which we want to be part of. We need to incorporate these into training programs of postgraduates, basically, and even undergraduates. I think the kind of practice, teaching training practice, which is there in most major centers, should now reach all centers which run postgraduate training. Because as you know, in the last 10 years, unlike our times, the number of seats have increased. and number of centers have increased, and then the training of centers are not the same, and the differences between the quality of training, postgraduate training, maybe we have not assessed that, maybe quite wide. So, Professor Rajmohan, do you want to very briefly say what we would want this geriatric group to take from this? Yes, sir. Over to you.
It's a very, as you rightly said, this is a very, very complex because unless you know the methodology parts, it is not that easy, especially systematic reviews. Because our clinicians are used to be comfortable with the narratives reviews. Of course, we know that is not a right practice, but that is the way they are used to. So that we should first of all understand. And of course, I enjoyed the talk. I'm sorry I couldn't come because I thought it was at 1:40 to start, but it was at 1:30 to start. Anyway, the veracity of Dr. Pratap is well expressed during the talk, and the agility who was talking it, and the elegance of the presentation touched me a lot. But as a clinician and teacher, I know where we are, especially in the developing less resource conditions. And because I am always, I am teaching and I am learning evidence-based medicine and epidemiology since the last 15 years. And I ask this question myself, why evidence is not being synthesized and not being translated into practice? You know one thing, in our critical care medicine book, there was a ready corner of a translation of diagnostic test evaluation from likelihood ratio to actually the point of care use. And that page was removed in the next edition. I contacted the others and asked why you have removed. Then they said that nobody was using that page. So this is the situation. So as time goes, maybe now we are having a lot of guidelines. Even I heard that for hepatic failure management, there are more than 42 guidelines. And even asthma, of course, there are guidelines of good standing like GINA guidelines, everything is there. So my humble advice is to try to popularize clinical practice guidelines and treatment guidelines. And as a part of that, because, the software gets everything. That is a different issue. But risk of, to explain the bias and risk of bias is not that easy, because the risk of bias means blinding, allocation concealment, the sequence degeneration. A lot of these are all complicated things. And right now, people think that researchers make things more complicated and confusing. So somehow we have to demystify it. I again repeat, the veracity which Dr. Pratap has shown, because Pratap and I know personally also, both of us are in the editorial board of Clinical Epidemiology and Global Health as associate editors, and he is a good friend of our India Glen team. But we have to don't have too much expectations. We have to demystify, simplify things, and try to sell it among our own clinicians, because they are still on the platform of narrative reviews. Because I have tried to sell the pediatrics IAP, but it is not that easy to make results. Thank you.
I think quick comments from two more people. I'm just seeing some people and then calling one Thomas Hype and then Professor Alka. Quick comments about how does this fit into our group's future plans? Your thoughts, just brief comments. Thanks, Thomas. You can start.
It will be useful for us. I think a more detailed, as Pratap sir has already said, a 2-week course can be arranged, I think, under the geriatric section. That would be a good idea.
We actually offer a 1-month course, 2 hours every day.
Okay.
Zoom, over the lockdown, our center is, and we have a lot of faculty, they'll do hands-on training.
Okay.
How to use the software, how to extract data. It's a 1-month course, 2 weeks, 2 hours every day.
That's a wonderful, that's a practical solution, I think.
But we can tell my staff, we've got people who've been doing training every day. So it's not something that cannot be done. It's just a question of saying, after you do it often enough, you'll wonder why you didn't do it.
Thanks. Over to Professor Alka.
Hi, Alka. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Pratap. Thank you. In your inimitable style, as Dr. Thomas Saib said, and others have said, you have your grasp of the subject is so good that you, with passion, you told us everything. And some of us maybe have been left behind during your discussion. What I want to bring out is that, I'm just a humble clinician, but after retirement, I have got a lot of interest in research methodology, not because I'm now going to do research in the end of my life, but what I find is that in our days, and even in the modern times, most places, apart from the premier institutions, do not teach research methodology at a very basic level, from p-value, odds ratio, relative risk, etc., to the postgraduate students. And I know that because being a person who looks at thesis, I look now at thesis for DNB, it just makes me feel extremely sad and depressed, because all the theses have to be returned because they are of such poor quality. And I shiver when I get some thesis, because I know that I'm not going to accept a single one. And I think in the MD and MS in the universities, it may be slightly better. And I want to know whether everybody is aware that ICMR has a very detailed course, online course, which is open to all MD, MS from the university side. Does everybody go through that course? I don't know. They do. But sadly, they have not left it open to the DNB students. I don't know why. But what I want to say is, so I couldn't access that website because you have to be an MD, MS student. So that is one step in the right direction. But I just like to know from you, Dr. Shaji and others, whether each institution has got its own research methodology course or not. Because what I found in the place that I'm working is that the knowledge of research and even basic things was so poor that I just got together 4 or 5 people who knew more than me, and we run a 2-day research methodology course for our students. And though I haven't done a systematic analysis of whether they improved after or before the course, but they do now, at least at the protocol stage, produce a protocol which you can read and it fits in. So I just want to know whether every institution in Kerala University has got research methodology course of at least 1 week duration for all its students or not. Because is that true? Is that there?
It is there. And I'll briefly tell about that. I think it's there in the syllabus. It's going to become mandatory. And we are going to relook at this. Various institutions at the institutional level has various courses. Training programs. There are training programs and sensitization programs for people who guide thesis. So this depends. We are definitely planning to bring some kind of benchmark beyond which is required to be met by all affiliated institutions. So there are lots of things in the pipeline, madam. Thank you very much for the concerns which are real. And just before I hand over is that okay? I'll just say 2 sentences and then Subhadra, I'll hand over to Pratap. One thing is that I think it's about
Dr. Shaji, I just want to make one comment more. These 2 things has to be seen differently. See, basic research methodology training is for a good thesis work for a postgraduate level. And training in systematic review and all these things are related to the clinical guideline process. I think it is better that we concentrate on clinical guidelines. That is what I said first. The research methodology is totally different.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. I think, to me, what lacks for most medical colleges is that you don't get exposure to good quality research and good quality research methodology training. Just one example, I remember going to MIQ many years back, not MIQ, men's hostel in the campus to see the World Cup football. Only when you start seeing the kind of, the level of football at that level, you suddenly recognize that our teams or the way we play football is different, and probably we could improve further because there is no limit for improvement. So if they could play at that level, why can't we? I think football has improved, cricket had improved after making this much more popular. I think exposure makes matters better. And I think when you have more number of people like Pratap in this country, then there'll be more and more people wanting to become better and better in research. And I think that critical mass, what they say about Hush Puppies, how Hush Puppies as a brand became very popular. It was not a very popular brand. After n number of people started using Hush Puppies as their shoes of preference, then it became a sensation, or it became very popular. I think research in India, in Kerala, definitely do not have any glamour. Nobody is looking up to it. And we are trying to change this in a very small way. Over to you, Pratap. If Subhadra does not have any announcements or anything. Subhadra?
No, we will have to start by 3:45 breakup session anyway, because
Okay.
You stop me. I may not finish. You stop me.
Yeah, I know.
If
3:30.
you sir have to go. That's right.
Yeah.
By
3:30, around 3:30, if you could wind up.
Yeah.
Then I will have to probably, okay, I'll have to select some stuff because I have, okay, anyway, let me see.
Also, one thing, this Cochrane is reviews are open to even other type of stakeholders like public and all. So I think clinicians are the must to do this thing.
Yeah, I think. Pratap, if you could use the next, what shall I say, 12, 15 minutes to make the formal presentation or whatever, then by the time it will be about 35.
Okay, fine. What I'll do right now is I'll just show you a few things and I'll stop because obviously.
Yeah.
Because so basically I want people to understand what a forest plot is. This is a forest plot looking at dichotomous outcome, the dead alive. Okay, so this is using RevMan. It's a very easy to read forest plot. So the first, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 studies identified by their author's surname and the year of publication. And this is comparing two anti-obesity drugs, drug A and drug B. The outcome is death, right? So if you look at the next two columns, from each paper, the authors have extracted the number of people given drug A and the number of people who died on drug B, A and B. Both the drug, they just extracted those numbers and put it into the software, right? So you can make out from across the 5 studies, totally 51 people died on drug A out of 930 given the drug, and 72 died of drug B out of 928 given the drug. Okay, now this is not what we are comparing. We're not comparing 51 out of 930 versus 72 out of 928. Because that breaks the power of randomization. So what we're comparing is across each study, what is the relative risk and confidence interval. And if you calculate the relative risk and confidence interval, you will get the same result. And this shows you the graphical distribution of the relative and risk confidence interval for each study. That blue blob in the center is the risk estimate. So the first one, 0.31, is that blue blob. And the confidence interval is from 0.07 to 1.37, right? So the line of no difference is 1. So if the confidence interval crosses 1, it means that we don't know what the result is. It is not statistically significant. If it does not cross 1, we know that it is significant, either favoring drug A or favoring drug B. That is, the upper and lower limits of the confidence interval should not touch across one. The blue blob in the center, the size of that blob is related to the weight given to the study. Now, the way the study gives weight is that any study which has got a narrow confidence interval will get more weight. Right? So if you look at it, that study had 750 people in each arm. It's a large study, and a lot of people died. There were a lot of events, particularly in the control group. The baseline risk of dying with drug B was pretty high. So whenever you have that kind of thing, what happens is that the variance becomes narrow. By variance, you translate and say confidence interval is narrow. So any study which has got a confidence interval which is narrow gets proportionately more weight. If you look at the next biggest study, 85 in each arm, third study, Jasani, that only got 6% of the weight. That's because even though it's a big study, the confidence interval is 2.27 to 13.81. Very wide confidence interval, most widest. That got the least weight. That means what it means is that in the pooled result, a lot of the data from pi is influencing the pooled result. Right, so that way, this is how it affects it. So the weight given to the study is proportional to the inverse of the variance or the confidence interval. Now, what we have to learn is when you look at it is to see what is the overall estimate. The overall estimate is that from these studies, it shows that drug A reduces the risk of death by 30%. The best estimate is 50%. The least estimate is 1%. Okay, so this is how you look at data from pooled risk ratios. Now, is it statistically significant? Yes. That last line there tells you the p-value is 0.04. It's a traditional test of significance for this difference. It tells you this difference is not due to chance. You're 96% sure it's not due to chance. But clinically, we're not very sure whether 1% difference is going to be very useful. So the first thing you do is, what is the overall effect? Right. So this is for dichotomous data. Now, if you're looking at the continuous data, like means and standard deviations, it depends on whether you have actually measured it using a similar kind of metric or use different things. For example, if you're looking at number of days, blood pressure, they're all in the same units. So you're looking basically at the difference in the means. So this is an example of antibiotic versus placebo. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 studies. So, and they're using the mean difference with their confidence intervals. So for each study, you're looking at the number in each arm, the mean and the standard deviation for each of the treatment and control, right? But what you have to make sure is that it's the standard deviation that's entered and not the standard error. Sometimes people make mistakes on that. Standard errors are very small. The next thing to make sure is data are distributed normally. I'll show you a simple way of looking at is the data distributed normally. That the mean distribution, if you follow the bell-shaped curve, the mean is at the center of the distribution, and there are 2 standard deviations on either side. So the standard deviation multiplied by 2 should be less than the mean. Otherwise, the mean will not be in the center of the distribution. If the standard deviation multiplied by 2 is more than the mean, it means that the data is skewed. So ideally, if you look at it, 2.6 into 2 is less than 6.4. So that's normally distributed. This is normally distributed. 7.2 into 7.97 is certainly not less than 2. Right, so that means this data is skewed. This data is normal. This last data is skewed. So you should be able to look at the data and in 5 seconds say this is skewed data. So what it means is that in the pooled estimate, if I've used skewed data, normal data, in a sensitivity analysis, I should remove those 2 studies that use skewed data and see overall are the effects still the same. Then I know that my overall results are okay. So this is what you mean. The next thing is, how do you interpret the result? What is 0.5 here? 0.58 means half a day. Minus 0.16, 0 minus 0.01. That means whatever you look at it is, it's about 1 day difference between the 2 treatments. So it depends on how much value you give that 1 day difference in interpreting this. The next kind of data, so if you look at this, this is a review we are doing on atomoxetine. This is a change score from the beginning to the end in the two groups. You're comparing the change from the baseline in both the groups. So you'll see there's a minus in it. It's less than the baseline. And the pooled estimate here shows that atomoxetine and methylphenidate are the same on this rating scale. There's no difference. If you want to know that 0.91 is that an important difference on this rating scale, you need external evidence. And there's a paper which shows that important treatment differences between groups on this ADHD-RS rating scale is 5.2 to 7.7 points. That's how you can validate this difference. Otherwise, looking at that difference, it doesn't mean anything. You don't know how clinically useful it is. Okay, this is another thing that can happen in mental health. We use a lot of rating scales. So assertive community management, 3 different types of rating scales. If you look at the means in each, it shows that each rating scale is a big scale or a small scale. You cannot just pool it numerically, right? And the other problem is the Colorado Symptom Rating Scale, a high outcome, a high score means a good outcome. The other two, a low score is a good outcome. So we have to accommodate all of this when we want to pool data assessing the same outcome concept but measured on different scales. So one of the ways is to bring it all to a common unit. And this is called the standardized mean difference, which is also called the effect size. You'll see the word effect size. It's a standardized mean difference where the two groups means of the differences divided by the average standard deviation. So this is the way they did it. The program will do all of this for you. Just enter the mean and standard deviation and choose SMD. But before they did that, to make sure all the scales are going in the same direction, they just put a minus for the Colorado Symptom. Now the scales are all in the same direction, and it gives you a result, SMD minus 0.162. The problem is, what does this mean? It's a standardized units, standard deviation units. So we are doing this atomoxetine review. We will look at the severity of ADHD symptoms, investigator-rated scale, parent-rated scale, teacher-rated scale, they're all different. They're measuring ADHD symptoms, they're all different scales. So here we have taken the investigator-rated scales, showing under each scale what are the results. And if you look under ADHD-RS, it shows clearly atomoxetine is better, minus 0.63, that is standardized mean units. And you can see that for the risk of bias for each study is also there. When you look at all these, a pooled effect estimate at the bottom tells you across all these scales, the standardized mean difference is minus 6.2, 0.70 to 0.55. That means atomoxetine is better than placebo. Right. Now, what does that mean? Well, there are 3 ways of interpreting it. So there's a general rule of thumb. If you get a standardized mean difference of 0.2, it means a small effect. 0.5 is a moderate effect, and 0.8 is a large effect. There's some variation. So a standardized mean difference of 0.62 means it's a moderate effect. So you'll say, compared to placebo, atomoxetine has a moderate effect in reducing mental health symptoms. The second way is if I can convert the standardized mean difference to a unit on the ADHD scale. That's very simple to do. So what you have to do in the placebo group of the ADHD scale, I take because we divided by the standard deviation to get the SMD, I take the median standard deviation in the placebo group and multiply it into the standard mean difference. That will give me minus 6.8 units on the ADHD scale. Right, and I know that on the ADHD scale, what the minimum important difference is. The third way I can do that is to use this. You can convert it into an MNT. So the handbook tells you how to do all of these things. Right, so I just wanted to explain to you what the ways you'll probably find your data. And the last thing I want to show you is a lot more, but I'll just take you right to the end. Suppose you've done your review and you finished everything. How do you interpret your review? How do you summarize your review? Like Dr. Kichu knows that you looked at your melatonin. You've got your forest plots, and it tells you very clearly that melatonin definitely helps prevent delirium in ICU patients and surgical patients, right? Now we take over from there. Because when I want to make a policy document, I need to have an evidence footprint, right? If I'm going to invest in melatonin in a policy document, I need to know from that document what is the evidence for. So the evidence can be the systematic review. But if I want to be confident in the results of a systematic review, I need to know for each of those forest plots, the pooled result, how much is it influenced by studies which are done badly, the risk of bias, right? So I also want to know the patients, populations, drug doses, everything used in those trials, does it apply to my setting? Is it directly applicable to me? Are all the results consistent or are the results inconsistent? I didn't deal with consistency here because of lack of time, but that's the other thing we want to know. And we also want to know, are the results precise? If it was the upper boundary of the low confidence interval or the lower bound, will I still use the intervention? And do I have enough events? How precise are the results and is it complete? So in the process of doing a systematic review, we define in advance which are the outcomes that we are going to summarize our findings, based on which we will change practice. And once we pool the result and look at it, we start grading the evidence. And to grade the evidence from a randomized control trial, we say if it's a randomized control trial, we assume it's high quality evidence. But if we find that out of 5 studies, 2 were at high risk of bias, and they contributed 50% of the weight in the analysis, then my confidence in the result can come down. So I'm downgrading my confidence by 1 level from high to moderate, or 2 levels from high to low. Like that, for each of these points, looking at the results, we can downgrade our confidence in that result, that outcome. If we have observational studies like cohort studies, they're considered to start at low because of selection bias. And they can be even downgraded right down. But if you think the study is done well, you can even upgrade your confidence because it showed a huge difference, or there were confounders. Without them, there could have even been better difference, or across the studies, I see a clear dose-response relationship. Anyway, these are some of the factors on which the grade process works. And after having applied this, we'll end up with 4 levels of confidence or certainty. If you say your grade certainty level is high, it means because there was no risk of bias, all the trial, everything directly applied to my practice, there was no inconsistency and there was no imprecision, and we think that publications all were included. I'm very confident that this estimate for this outcome is the true estimate. And I know they have enough studies there and patients that if you do further research, it's not going to change the outcome. So depending on that, you're saying high certainty or moderate certainty. That is, for one reason, you downgrade it. And if you downgrade it further, it can be low certainty and very low. So this is reflected in the language you will use to end your review and interpret it. You will say, there is high certainty evidence from these studies that it will reduce death. You're confident. Or you might say, from these trials, there's moderate certainty evidence that it will probably do this. That means some doubt is entertained. Or you'd say it may do it. And you'll explain why you think your confidence is reduced. So this is how a systematic review summary of findings table is used by a guideline panel to formulate recommendations which are either strong recommendations based on the balance of benefits that most people would use, or a conditional recommendation which says, you know, the harms, there are some harms or the costs are high, so it's conditional on whether you want to do that. And it's based on high, moderate, low, or very low quality evidence. If we look at the review, the systematic review ends with a summary of findings table for antidepressants versus placebo. And it describes what population and stuff, and it tells you that for the outcome of depression using rating scales, the standardized mean difference is 10 points lower, 0.26 to lower to 0.6 higher. That means it includes 1, no effect. And they had no problems with the way the studies were done. So it's saying high certainty evidence that there is no difference in the effect of antidepressant versus placebo on people with depression from these 8 studies, right? Number of responders, 0.8 to 3.7, it says, with placebo, there'll be 37% response. With antidepressant, it will be 50% or 51%, but it could be from 32 to 690, which means lower to higher. So it says low certainty. So what this means is that there may be no difference in the number of responders from these trials at 6 to 12 weeks. But they did find moderate certainty evidence that there could be an increase in the number of people who are defined as having remitted. That's the only positive thing. And they also found that side effects were probably a little higher with antidepressants. Right? And they give you footnotes explaining why they did what they did. This is a formal process that we teach people how to do. And you can help use that to guide your conclusion, saying there's very little evidence, only on one, that remitting people, there's some evidence suggests it might work, but otherwise we don't think it's a useful thing. Now, if you look at guidelines, international guidelines, NICE guidelines, you will find the recommendation is based on this review. That's how these reviews influence practice. So I'll stop here. There are a lot of resources I've talked about here. I can share this with you, and people can use this to look at the regular studies, the guidelines, how to assess this systematic reviews. But the most important thing is this handbook. It is free. You can get it online from the software. It describes everything that I've described here in great detail. If you read this, you don't need anybody to teach you anything. The information is out there on the web. Look at this, look at reviews, attend one of our workshops. And you can start doing systematic reviews and you can start teaching them. And that's what this country needs, people. If you're looking at prevalence and risk, the manual from the Adelaide Institute is very good. It gives you a lot of information on stuff. So it's not that there are no resources. It's not that there's no information. It's only our mindset that we have to say, this is something I will master. All there. Anyway, I thank you for this opportunity. If you'd given me more time, I would have talked for 2 weeks more, but I know where to stop. Thank you.
Okay, over to you, Subhadra. Let us think about the timeline. How much time we have for discussion, comments now?
Now we by 3:45 we have to go to the breakup room, or else we won't have time for the discussion between the participants.
Okay. Let us see. There is one comment, Binoy Matthew, about the usefulness of MOOC, that is massive open online course.
Yeah, this. Yeah, there are many courses. They are not the only
So
ones.
KUHS
there are courses all over the place.
KUHS has courses on this platform, and I'm sure we will be, I think this group will be focusing on systematic reviews in the area of interest of geriatrics. So our area of interest will be geriatrics. So we will be definitely looking at that. Thank you, Binoy, for that suggestion.
Another quick amount of Manipal has sent so many people to our courses. We have so many physiotherapists that we have trained, and some of them are now editors in their groups. So we must have trained more than 2,000 people who are authors doing reviews, and many people are now editors. They are interested, they come, they can do. It's not complicated.
I think getting exposure is the first step on the ladder. I think you then start climbing. Some people may not climb. They're quite.
They shouldn't. What they should be able to do is to read a systematic review and say, that's good evidence, I'll use it. Or at least I'll say, I'll discuss it to see whether we should use it. It may not be relevant to us.
And I think age is no bar to attend any course. And I think many of us...
Considering that most of your teachers are old, why should you worry about going and learning? The same age people are teaching you.
So I think that's very important. We need to take more courses more frequently so that you remain focused and you become a model for others.
But I'm telling you, a simple thing to do is journal clubs at PG level.
Pardon?
Journal clubs, so
Yes,
that
yes.
everybody discusses a systematic review
Yeah,
and
yeah.
get somebody to come and help you understand it, and then see, that's how you start doing it. Every month, PG's journal club systematic.
I think there are initiatives in various institutions. We had ran a journal club, a critical appraisal journal club in Department of Psychiatry for 2 years. We had encouraged other departments to do that. I think again, you need to have more people engaged in this kind of activities at the same time so that it becomes a norm. Otherwise, it becomes, a startup which fails. So that kind of thing. I think I take your point. We will be definitely getting back to many of you with some of our plans, which we piloted. And then now that we have a bigger landscape, which is Kerala University of Health Sciences and its affiliated colleges. So we might want to try out a certain critical appraisal journal club in a group of affiliated institutions, and how it works. How is it feasible? Will it work? How much will it help? And I'm sure we'll get back to you.
See, for the example, the IPS South Zone
Yes.
has been conducting a research course for the last 1 month. And they take one topic, cohort studies, and they lecture. The next week, a student does a journal club on that topic. So that's a good thing because, so similar things can be done, no? Because you teach them something on cohort studies or something, then they have to bring an article and teach them to interpret it.
Okay, Subhadra.
Yes, sir. So it is.
Yeah, I think it is time. You take over now. Pratap, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sir, thank you for the wonderful
Welcome.
session.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, we can have a breakup room now with 5 of our moderators, Shaji sir, Rajmohan sir, Thomas Aip sir, Balakrishna sir, and Alka madam moderating 5 groups. Is that okay? I think the participant number is dwindling now, so that the group will be very small.
That's okay. Go ahead with it.
Yeah, we can take around 30 minutes for a brainstorming session in between the participants, and coming back to the main room and having a 5-minute discussion. Each participant, 1 participant each from 5 group. 1 volunteer will discuss for 5 minutes about what is going to be the program or what is their overall assessment. And after that, we can wind up the session.
Okay, what do you want out of that session? What do you want? What do you expect?
Yeah, that is what these participants are going to have an idea about the future programs, how they are going to deal with this group. That is what.
Can I? My suggestion is that we have come together. We had been together for 2 days over few sessions.
Yeah.
Now, after going back, what do we want to do?
Yeah.
What kind of continuity is? What is the prospect of being together? Do you want to form interest groups of disorders or general thing, or are you wanting to do something at the institutional level? You want to participate in collaborating with each other or whatever, whatever you have. Is that correct, Subhadra? Is that the
yeah. And how it is going to give an input into this?
Yeah, I think what benefit you had, what will you do in the next foreseeable future, and how we could collaborate. Not necessarily, this is my vision, not necessarily this group. We are hoping to have a group of people who will be willing and happy to invest in research among older people, whatever kind of research, and then would want to learn from each other, want to get linked with various people. So that kind of thing, it's not very concrete.
Okay.
Is that okay with you, sir?
Yeah. That is what we are intending to do, because these 3 sessions have given an insight what to do, some sort of way out. So we can move on to the breakup room, sir.
Yes.
Now the people number is gone down to 22. I think others may not be interested, or might be due to the net connection. I will connect with the IT department and I will do it.
Madam, you can speak to me over the phone. I mean, over this line only.
Harilal sir is there. You just tell
Harilal
him he is
Okay.
attending.
Madam,
So,
please, please name the moderators of each of the group.
Pardon, sir?
Moderators of each. There are 5 groups, no?
5 group.
Who are the moderators?
The moderators, as mentioned earlier, Dr. Shaji,
Yeah.
Dr. Rajmohan, Dr. Thomas Aip, Dr. Balakrishnan Nair, Kichu sir. That is Balakrishnan, Kichu Nair, and Dr. Alka Ganesh.
Nice.
Just give me a second.
Yeah. So this can be a teamwork.
Rajmohan sir is not seen in the list.
So he's gone.
Can you just talk to him?
Yeah, I will go. I'll go.
Maybe
Have 4 groups then. Because,
I think 4 groups.
not many people. Yeah.
Yeah, not many people.
Because I have another meeting
Yeah.
in about 45 minutes. I have a hookup with Maastricht in Holland by 9:30 my time. So need to
I
have
think
some dinner
Harilal,
in between.
Harilal sir. If Professor Rajmohan comes, he could be part of one of the 4 groups. Make 4 groups.
No, Rajmohan sir is coming back, sir.
Okay.
His connectivity lost and he is now coming back from the phone. He's coming back, sir. So you can add.
Alka Ganesh madam is also not present.
Okay, then start with 4 group, and when they come back, we can settle.
They could come into one of the groups. That's fine.
Maybe due to the connectivity.
That's okay. I think that problem could recur. So
Yeah.
is it that the 4th person should be there to make the 4 groups, or then you go for 3 groups then? Because unless that person is there, probably Harilal sir cannot start the group. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah. Just want to
Then
ask
make
him
it
that
3
first.
groups. Make it 3 groups.
Yeah, I have already. I have assigned 4 groups.
Okay, then fine.
Yeah,
Okay.
one room, Dr. Thomas Isaac is there. Second room,
Yeah.
Kichu sir is there.
Yeah.
Third room,
Raji sir.
Raji sir is there. Fourth room,
Rajmohan sir is coming in.
coming here.
Put Rajmohan, yeah.
I think Rajmohan sir can join our group. Can he
Oh.
join? Yeah.
But he made 4 groups. Harilal, whatever is easy without wasting time
Yeah.
would be better.
Yeah, okay, I'll open all rooms now.
Okay. Alternatively, till Rajmohan comes, Subhadra, Dr.
Okay,
Subhadra can be in that group.
I am present.
Yes.
I had some connectivity.
Okay, okay.
Okay, start.
Okay, sir is also a saint. Sir, I have opened 4 rooms right now.
Okay, okay. Room 3.
Subhadra madam, in which room are you going? Or,
അല്ല ഞാൻ പുറത്ത് നിൽക്കാം അവസാനം ടൈം ആക്കാൻ നോക്കണ്ടേ.
ശരി, ശരി. മാഡം ഇവർക്ക് എത്ര മിനിറ്റാ കൊടുത്തിരിക്കുന്നത്?
ഞാൻ 30 മിനിറ്റാ കൊടുത്തിരിക്കുന്നത്.
ഓക്കെ, അപ്പം 4:30 വന്നാൽ മതിയല്ലോ.
4:30 4:25 4 ആയാലും കുഴപ്പമില്ല.
അല്ല, 4:20 മതി.
മതി
4:50 കഴിഞ്ഞു.
അതെ, സമയം അപ്പം. ഈ ഗ്രൂപ്പ് വന്നപ്പോഴായിരിക്കും കുറച്ചുപേരൊക്കെ പേടിച്ച് ഓടിപ്പോയത്.
അറിയില്ല, ചിലപ്പം അദ്ദേഹത്തിന്റെ ടോക്ക് കേൾക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി വന്നവര് മാത്രമായിരിക്കും.
സർട്ടിഫിക്കറ്റ് കൊടുക്കണ്ടേ? സർട്ടിഫിക്കറ്റും കൊടുക്കണം.
സർട്ടിഫിക്കറ്റ് കൊടുക്കണമെങ്കിൽ ഇതിൽ പാർട്ടിസിപ്പേറ്റ് ചെയ്യുന്നവർക്ക് കൊടുത്താൽ മതി.
അതെ,
അതൊന്ന് നോക്കി വെക്കണം.
സാറിനെ അറിയാം.
റൂമിലുണ്ടായിരുന്ന എടുക്കാൻ പറ്റുമെന്ന് എനിക്ക് അറിയില്ല. ഒരു മായാമോഹനൻ വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്. ഏത് ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഇടണം?
ഏതായാലും കുഴപ്പമില്ല. മായാമോഹനൻ ആരെയാണ്? മായാമോഹനെ എന്താ ജോയിൻ ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റിയില്ലെന്ന് പറയുന്നുണ്ട്.
അല്ല, she has not been assigned to any room.
അവരെ ഏതെങ്കിലും റൂമിൽ ഇട്ടാൽ മതി. ആൻഡ് ബിനോയ് മാത്യുവും ഒരാൾ പുറത്തുണ്ടല്ലോ, അയാളെയും ഒരു റൂമിൽ ഇട്ടാൽ മതി.
ബിനോയിനെ കണ്ടില്ലല്ലോ മാഡം.
ബിനോയുടെ പേര് ഇവിടെ കിടക്കുന്നു. അദ്ദേഹം വെയിറ്റ് ചെയ്യായിരിക്കും.
ഞാൻ മായാമോഹനെ തോമസ് ഐപ്പിന്റെ ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഇട്ടു.
മായാമോഹന്റെ പേര് ഇവിടുന്ന് പോയിട്ടില്ല.
പക്ഷേ ലിസ്റ്റിൽ വന്നിട്ടില്ല, റൂമിന്റെ ലിസ്റ്റിൽ വന്നിട്ടില്ല.
ഇവിടെ പാർട്ടിസിപ്പന്റ് ലിസ്റ്റിൽ 4 പേര് ബാക്കിയുള്ളതില് നമ്മൾ രണ്ടുപേരും അല്ലാതെ ബിനോയ് മാത്യു മായാമോഹൻ.
പക്ഷേ ബിനോയ് മാത്യു അല്ല. ബിനോയ് മാത്യുവിനെ ഞാൻ 4-ൽ ഇട്ടിട്ടുണ്ട്. ജോയിൻ ചെയ്തിട്ടില്ല പുള്ളി.
ഓക്കെ.
മായാമോഹനും ജോയിൻ റൂമിലേക്ക് കയറിയിട്ടില്ല. അസൈൻ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്, റൂമിലേക്ക് കയറിയിട്ടില്ല.
മനസ്സിലാവുന്നില്ല എന്തോ,
അറിയില്ല.
എന്തായാലും അവര് ഡിസ്കഷൻ സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്തോ?
അവര് ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ടാവണം.
ഓക്കെ.
എനിക്കിവിടെ അറിയാൻ പറ്റില്ല.
ഓക്കെ. മായാമോഹൻ 2 വന്നു.
Invite to the room എന്ന് പറയുന്നുണ്ട്.
Madam, you are already assigned to group 1, but you have not joined.
Yes, sir, I am. I clicked the join button, but I couldn't join. But it's just left from the Zoom meeting itself.
We don't know why, but we have. I think we have received another call from your end, and I have moved both the calls to room number 1.
Okay, sir.
You are ready to join.
Yes, I will try to join, but at the same time, I am leaving from the Zoom meeting as such.
Pardon?
പരിചയമില്ലാത്തോണ്ടാന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു.
Everybody else has joined. Ah. Okay. Move to എവിടുന്ന് മറ്റേത് പോകുന്നുണ്ടോ? കുഴപ്പമില്ല, കിടന്നിട്ട്. മാഡം ഒരു BK ജോയിൻ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. ആരാ ഈ BK? അറിയാവുന്ന ആളാണോ?
അല്ലായിരിക്കും.
പേര് എഴുതാൻ പറഞ്ഞു. BKക്ക് പകരം if they could write their name.
അതെ, BK ഓപ്പൺ ആക്കിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. എന്താ സംസാരിക്കാൻ നോക്കുന്നു? Please speak.
My name is Blessy. I'm
Blessy ആണ് മാഡം.
Madam, please give your name instead of the initials.
Blessy K. Blessy എന്നാണ് പറഞ്ഞത്.
Okay, you are assigned room number 2.
Blessy, please go to room number 2.
Okay.
ഇതൊരു പുതിയ സംവിധാനമായതുകൊണ്ട് ആൾക്കാർക്ക് ഇത്തിരി കൺഫ്യൂഷൻ കാണും. Yes. Hello, sir. നാല് 4:25 അത് അരമണിക്കൂർ കൊടുത്തിരുന്നു. പക്ഷെ ഇപ്പം അരമണിക്കൂർ സമയമില്ലല്ലോ. 4:25 തിരിച്ചു പോരും. അതിന് മുമ്പ് എന്തെങ്കിലും ഒരു ഐഡിയ ആയിട്ട് ആരെങ്കിലും പറയണമെന്ന് നോക്കും. 4 പോയി.
മാഡം വീണ്ടും ഒരു ബിനോയ് വന്നിട്ടുണ്ട്.
അതാണ് എനിക്ക് മനസ്സിലായില്ല, ഞാൻ നോക്കുമായിരുന്നു അതെന്താ.
ഞാൻ അങ്ങനെ ബ്രേക്ക്ഔട്ട് 4 ആക്കിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. നേരത്തെ പുള്ളി കയറിയത് അവിടെയാണെന്ന് തോന്നുന്നു.
ആഹാ. നാല് 25 വരാംന്നാ പറഞ്ഞേ.
ആരാ?
ഷാജി സാറ്.
ആ.
ഷർലാൽ സാറേ ഇപ്പൊ ഒരു ജ്യോതിഷം എവിടെ നിന്ന് വന്നിരിക്കുന്നു? തിരിച്ചു പോയെന്ന്.
ജ്യോതിസിന് ഞാൻ ഏതൊരു റൂമിൽ ഇട്ടായിരുന്നല്ലോ. ടൂലിടട്ടോ?
ഇട്ടോ.
തിരിച്ചു വന്നതാണോ ഇനി?
അത് അല്ല, അങ്ങനെ ആയിരിക്കില്ല, അറിയാതെ എന്തെങ്കിലും പറ്റിയതായിരിക്കും. ഇട്ടാ മതി.
ഓക്കെ, അസൈൻ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. മാഡം കട്ട് ചെയ്യട്ടെ എല്ലാരെയും.
കട്ട് ചെയ്യാം അല്ലേ?
4:25
25 ഇല്ല, 1 മിനിറ്റും കൂടി ഉണ്ട്.
4:25 1 മിനിറ്റ് കൂടെ ഉണ്ട്. അവർ പോയിട്ട് അരമണിക്കൂറിന് മേലായിരുന്നു.
എന്നാ കട്ട് ചെയ്യാം.
ഒരു മെസ്സേജ് എല്ലാവർക്കും കൊടുക്കണോ?
മെസ്സേജ് ഓക്കെ.
കൊടുക്കണോ?
അല്ല, മെസ്സേജ് കൊടുത്താൽ എങ്ങനെയാ അറിയുന്നേ? എങ്ങനെയാ കൊടുക്കാൻ പറ്റുന്നേ?
എനിക്കിവിടെ ബ്രോഡ്കാസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും.
ഒന്ന് ചെയ്ത് നോക്കിയേ. 2 മിനിറ്റ് ഞാൻ വൈൻഡ് അപ്പ് ചെയ്യാം. സാറിന്റെ അവിടെ വന്നിരുന്നെങ്കിൽ ആ ബ്രേക്കപ്പ് റൂം എങ്ങനെ ഇരിക്കുന്നു കാണായിരുന്നു. സാറിന്റെ റൂമിൽ വന്നിരുന്നെങ്കിലേ ബ്രേക്കപ്പ് റൂം എങ്ങനെ ഇരിക്കുന്നുണ്ടെന്ന് കാണായിരുന്നു. ഓക്കെ. ഞാൻ ഹാർവാർഡിന്റെ ക്ലാസ് ഒക്കെ അറ്റൻഡ് ചെയ്തപ്പോ ഈ ബ്രേക്കപ്പ് റൂമില്ല, നല്ല ഡിസ്കഷൻ നടക്കും അവിടെ. ചെറിയ റൂം ആവുമ്പോഴേ എന്നുവെച്ചാൽ ചെറിയ ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ആവുന്നുണ്ട്. ടൈമില്ല. മറ്റേ ക്ലാസ് കുറച്ച് നീണ്ടുപോയി, കമന്റ്സും കുറച്ച് നീണ്ടുപോയി. പക്ഷെ നല്ലതായിരുന്നു. ആൾക്കാർക്ക് തലവേദനയായി കാണിഞ്ഞു.
രാജ്മോഹൻ സാർ തിരിച്ചു വന്നു.
സീറ്റ് വന്നു, ആ ഗ്രൂപ്പ് വന്നു.
We have finished our work. We are waiting for others to come.
They are coming.
Okay.
സാർ ഒരു മെസ്സേജ് കിട്ടിയായിരുന്നില്ലല്ലേ?
മെസ്സേജ് അയച്ചോ?
കണ്ടിരുന്നോ? 2 മിനിറ്റ് മൈൻഡ് അപ്പ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറഞ്ഞിട്ട് അങ്ങനെ എന്തെങ്കിലും മെസ്സേജ് കണ്ടിരുന്നോ?
ഇല്ല.
അല്ല, റൂമിന് പുറത്തല്ല.
ഹരിലാലാണോ?
അതെ അതെ.
ഞങ്ങൾ ഊഹിച്ചു റൂം ലീവ് ചെയ്യണമായിരിക്കും. ഞാനതൊരു ലീവ് റൂം എന്ന് കണ്ടോണ്ട് ഊഹിച്ചിട്ട് റൂം ലീവ് ചെയ്തു. നമ്മുടെ കോമൺ സെൻസ് മെസ്സേജ് കണ്ടില്ല, കുഴപ്പമില്ല. ഇതിനൊക്കെയുള്ള ഒരു ഇഷ്യൂ ഈ ഓൺലൈൻ ആയപ്പോഴത്തേക്ക് നമ്മുടെ ചായ കുടി, നമ്മളൊക്കെ വയസ്സന്മാർക്കൊക്കെ ചായ കുടിക്കുന്നൊക്കെ സ്വഭാവം ഒന്നും നടക്കുന്നില്ല.
മറ്റേത് ഈ കോൺഫറൻസിനൊക്കെ ചായെങ്കിലും കുടിക്കായിരുന്നു സാർ. ചായയും വടയൊക്കെ ലാഭമായി.
അല്ല, നമ്മുടെ യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റി എത്ര രൂപ ഇപ്പൊ ലാഭിച്ചേക്കെന്ന് അറിയാം 2 വർഷമായിട്ട്. ശരി, മറ്റാണെങ്കിൽ എന്തുവായിരുന്നു DA.
അതെ.
Excuse me, ma'am. This is Dr. Angela. I got out of the group. Can you suggest me what I need to do? I had problems in the connection.
Pardon, Angela, you were not clear. It was not audible properly, not audible properly.
Ma'am, I got dropped out of the program little after it started.
Okay, it's no issue. We are coming back to the main room. That's right.
Okay. So I can just stay here.
Yeah, wait. And we are going to have the your recap with this. What are your suggestions from each group?
Okay, thank you.
So someone from your group will give a recap, like suggestions.
Okay, ma'am. I'll stay here.
Okay.
Manju, you can start, I think.
No, one means that let others to come.
I'm going to close all the breakout rooms.
Please
Shall I
close.
proceed?
Please close.
I need to leave now because I've got another meeting and I need to catch some dinner before I start.
Okay, sir. It is 9 o'clock. I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir, for your consideration and support to the university.
Thank you very much.
Shaji is not there, so on behalf of the university, I express our gratitude and sincere thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I think our group had a very, very, very passionate discussion about a few issues, and I think Dr. Anish is going to summarize our discussion.
That's great.
And it's good to see a lot of passion in my small group. So they will talk, and I hope to see you again soon in Trichy, KUHS, when the COVID situation improves.
Okay, thank you, sir.
We hope so.
Okay, bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye.
Lots of thanks from our university for being with us for these 2 days.
That's okay. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a long day, so I need to go now.
I know.
And I have another meeting. I finish by about 10:30 tonight. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir.
Okay, bye.
Madam, ഞാനും പതുക്കെ ചലിക്കട്ടോ. മാഡത്തിനെ ഇതാക്കിട്ടെ.
Okay. Sir, എല്ലാരും തിരിച്ചെത്തിയോ?
ഗ്രൂപ്പിൽ എല്ലാവരും വന്നിട്ടുണ്ടോ എന്ന് എനിക്കറിയില്ല.
വന്നിട്ടുണ്ടെന്ന് എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു.
Now it's 23, madam.
Okay. ഫസ്റ്റ് ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഒന്ന് സ്റ്റാർട്ട് ചെയ്താല് ഫസ്റ്റ് ഗ്രൂപ്പ് ഒന്ന് അവരുടെ ഒരു ആരാ വോളണ്ടിയർ എന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ അവരൊന്ന് പ്രസന്റ് ചെയ്താലേ.
ഞങ്ങളുടെ ഗ്രൂപ്പാണോ? അല്ലേ?
ഞങ്ങളുടെ ആണോ എന്ന് സംശയമുണ്ട്.
അല്ല 3 ആണ് 3 ഞാൻ 3 ആണ്.
Sir, Thomas Ipe sirന്റെ ആണ് first group.
Oh yes.
Sirന്റെ second group, Shaji sirന്റെ third group, Rajmohan sirന്റെ fourth group.
Okay.
Dr. Bella was supposed to summarize it. She has unfortunately logged out, I think.
And then the second group.
We'll start with second group.
Yeah, second group will do.
Good evening to everybody.
I know she came back.
Yeah, I'm Bella. Bella belongs to the first group. We had a discussion how we can improve our facilities to care for the old age people. And first thing what we had discussed is the student community. Most of us whom we had the discussion participating were nursing faculty. So we had discussed about the point view of students. We used to take the students to the old age homes for 1 day visit. And the way the old age people there, they expressed their views. With that, we felt that if it is a continuous visit to the people, those who are in the old age home, it would be best instead of going 1 day and coming back. And if it is a continuous one. And another thing is a continuous monitoring is needed for the elderly people who are staying in the old age homes. And one suggestion came from the PHC side when they go, maybe it is possible for them to continuously monitor them. And if it is needed to take them to the hospitals for any sort of medical help, and for the transportation, they can collaborate with the NGOs and old age homes, and that can be done. And another thing is 1 day can be allotted for the geriatric population to avail the services in the hospitals, so that their they will be finding it easy to make the facilities available instead of making them waiting for a long time for their help. So that is one suggestion came up. And conducting medical camps to find out the needs of the elderly people. That was another suggestion. And from this research side, and one suggestion was that the PG students, when they are doing the thesis, that can be focused more on the geriatric population. And another suggestion was PG students, the number of PG students will be less. And in the UG students in nursing, the third year students, they have a mini project work. Maybe that can be done or focused to the geriatric population, so that we'll be able to get more evidence for what they need for. Another is the physiotherapy services towards their need. That also need to be considered as a continuous basis. And one suggestion was that the thesis which are done by the PG students, most of the times which are not published, maybe if the university can make some arrangements to access those thesis works through some websites, that will be useful and good for many people to visualize that and make use of it. These are some of the suggestions which we had the discussions as the first group.
Subhadra?
Okay, sir. അടുത്ത ഗ്രൂപ്പിലേക്ക് പോവുകയാണോ അതോ എല്ലാം കഴിഞ്ഞിട്ട് സാറ് കമന്റ് ചെയ്താൽ മതിയാവോ? ആരെങ്കിലും ഒരാൾ കമന്റ് ചെയ്താൽ മതിയാവോ?
മതിയാവും.
The second group.
Good evening, everyone. So our second group was a mixture of nursing, physiotherapy faculty and physiotherapy faculty. So the point which was stressed was again education, both UG.
You are presenting there. I am presenting here.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Can continue.
Yeah.
So UG and the back in the undergraduate and postgraduate education. So the platform now we have is the university, which has all the medical colleges under it, all the nursing colleges under it. So if the university can take a policy decision that every medical college should have a team which will look after geriatric education and geriatric care in every hospital. Because if it is left as optional, it will never work out. But if we take emergency medicine or ART clinic, only when it is made compulsory that such things happen in a medical, and teaching institutions have a key role in forming educated and knowledgeable professionals, whether it is nursing, physiotherapy, or medical professionals. The second thing that we had discussed was it is multidisciplinary and an option of an age-friendly hospital initiative in line with the baby-friendly hospital. We had the baby-friendly hospital initiative for pediatrics. Similarly, a age-friendly hospital initiative which will bring about IEC activities, the posters showing delirium, how delirium prevention, the importance of exercise. So the another thing was exercise prescription that we had discussed, because preventive geriatrics, it is always better to prevent a fall than to treat a fall after it has happened. So preventive geriatrics, especially in the form of rehabilitation. So the physiotherapy faculty had opined about exercise prescriptions to be made mandatory, and also to evaluate falls. വീണത് ചികിത്സിച്ചു വീട്ടിൽ പോയതിനെക്കാട്ടും എന്തുകൊണ്ട് വീണു അതിന് പുറകെയുള്ള കാരണങ്ങൾ. So to go behind the reasons behind them, for that we need a team who would be talking about geriatrics, who will be imbibing the principles of geriatrics. And one thing that's happening in our institution is a nursing college. They are doing an add-on course in gerontology. So such things to happen, there needs to be a team in every medical college. It need not be a department, because a department, a geriatric ward, a geriatric OP will have less things to do than a team which can involve into the day-to-day activities. That was the discussion that has happened. And also to facilitate publication of thesis that is done, because thesis is made mandatory for postgraduates and for writing exam. But it should also be made mandatory that they publish it. Otherwise, after exam, that remains in the cupboard without seeing daylight. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Anish. And then the group 3.
Before that, either all of us should send it as a Word document to Subhadra. Just bullet points, these things. Otherwise, this is not getting recorded or documented by Subhadra or me. Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Bennett.
Yeah, good evening to everybody. We were group 3, a mixture of various disciplines of medicine. We did deliberate on the matter, and we felt we should definitely congratulate and appreciate the venture of the Kerala University of Health Sciences in organizing this workshop. It was very useful, very informative, and you have brought the like-minded birds of the same feather flock together. It was an eye-opener for us to realize that in the 14 districts of the state of Kerala, more than 30 lakh geriatric age group is there. We discussed about what and how the government initiated programs for the geriatric should be encouraged. Local self-governments conduct surveys, not knowing what to do with the surveys. As the group 2 pointed out, the teaching institutions in those in the areas of the local self-government, we too thought could be instrumental in helping out them to analyze the surveys. There was a felt need for rehabilitation of the disabled and disabled needy. Regarding how to inculcate the need for geriatrics, as Group 2 said about baby-friendly initiative, we were under the impression that at UG level, we have to catch them young. At UG level, they must be encouraged to be involved in research methodology. Research should be encouraged among the younger age group. Whether it be nursing or medicine or any branch, they should be exposed to the geriatric age groups where they should think, what can we do for them? How can we analyze their issues? At PG level, much more, we thought that it is dormant. It is just for filling up completing the thesis work. Much more has to be done. Active research methodology programs has to be organized at institutional levels, and the quality of the research programs have to be enhanced. Good systematic review, interactive sessions should be there for at weekly level, on every week for the postgraduate students. Another thing which we thought was, regarding the various issues, we must bifurcate the issues to learn more. It's like the 5 fingers of our own hand. We should be together at the same time, knowing and doing research regarding geriatrics, say stroke, mental health, or dementia, things like that. What can university definitely has the platform. Whether we like it or not, the institutions are bound to obey. The university has to set the ball rolling. At the same time, university can begin for MBBS doctors, those who are into community at primary health center, in the government level or at any level, the university should organize at least a 2-year fellowship program for gerontology medicine. University should take the lead, like what we have, general nursing and midwifery, general nursing and gerontology. The population is not small. Gerontology is becoming the need of the hour. Have a syllabus set apart for this and make it part of the university. I think I have told whatever our group has said. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bennett. And the next is the 4th team.
Thank you, Dr. Subhadra. The 4th team, we focused rather than general to research. So I requested all those to focus on research and develop what they can do for research. So I request Manju to present.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, all. My name is Manju CS. Working as Associate Professor in Pharmacy, Government Medical College, Kozhikode. Our team members are Mrs. Mary KJ, Mr. Binoy Matthew, and Mrs. Anu Prida. We all belongs to nursing, pharmacy, and physiotherapy. We discussed many problems faced by the geriatric population. And we identified the problems are medication and adherence related problems in geriatric population, then vaccination related issues. So the study to assess the COVID vaccine hesitancy among geriatric population with the comorbidities, then study the efficacy of 2 strategies of COVID vaccination among geriatric population, that is door delivery or institutional setting delivery, to study the comparative effectiveness. Then another case is the geriatric population is prone to fall. So balance exercise in fall prevention among geriatric population in the institutional setting. And our mentor, Dr. Raj Mohan, discussed how to do the research. We get either a systematic review or a research we can do. So first we will do this as research question. We will develop research question according to Pike code format. Then we'll set up the full protocol. Then our search engines search strategy will follow this Rahman 5 Cochrane handbook, and we'll do the research. We can include the PG students or UG students in the research. Then we can submit the report and plan accordingly to prevent these problems or correct these problems in learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Manju ma'am. Shaji sir.
How many minutes we have? I think we see it's very important to end in time. We have crossed the time.
No, we have crossed the time. We have 4:30 was our time.
Okay.
Now we have 4:50.
4 minutes.
Yeah.
Do we have all? I will take only 1 minute.
Yeah.
You can take 3 minutes, all of you. Is that okay?
Yeah, the participants too can say some comment.
Okay, okay. Just one thing. I'm saying this is a personal opinion, not as Dean Research, because I can't tell about the university's policy. If you contact us with a query that I want to do research, what should I do? There will not be any response from the university. But if you say that I'm interested in this area of research, I know that these are the publications in this area. I have read that. I have contacted this many people, and then we would want a proposal to go on. Can you get more people involved? Then there will be very good response. Because I think you will have to do your 50%. Rest the others can help. Without investing energy, just expressing desire. I have my friend Thomas Ipe here. He repeatedly tells that it's good to have desire, but it has to be backed by commitment, proven track record of having done something rather than wish something. So I think that is a personal policy open to you now. You will do all the follow-up. Thank you.
Thomas Ipe sir, Raj Mohan sir, any comments?
I have only two comments. One is, see, every journey of mile starts with a small step. So perhaps this may be a small step, but nothing prevents us from getting into a journey of miles with, of course, results. That is first thing. Second thing is that in the Cochrane book, there is a beautiful quote. That is, I have learned everything only after I have put my weight on the chair of the great giants. So similarly, Dr. Shaji has brought great giant to us. Pratap Tarian is the great giant in this field. And the great giant himself, as God has come. Bahubali cinema God has come. Similarly, Pratap has come and offered all the support. It is only out of the friendship between Shaji and Pratap. I think you people are one of the most blessed group who can tap that. Kindly exploit and tap that and show some result to your own students and your own colleagues. My all sincere wishes, whatever help I have to give you, I am very ready and ever ready. Thank you.
So may I add one comment? ഇതില് ഷാജി സാറ് നമ്പർ തന്നപ്പോ ഞാൻ നേരിട്ട് വിളിച്ചു. എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു പ്രതാപ് തരിയൻ സാറിന്റെ വലിയൊരു മനസ്സാണ്. ആരാണ് എന്താണെന്ന് ചോദിക്കാതെ ഹെൽത്ത് യൂണിവേഴ്സിറ്റിന്ന് വിളിച്ചപ്പോ തന്നെ സമ്മതിക്കുകയാണ് ഉണ്ടായത്. അതിനുശേഷമാണ് ഞാൻ ഷാജി സാറാണ് നമ്പർ തന്നതെന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അപ്പം അത്രയും വലിയൊരു മനസ്സോടെയാണ് സാറ് വന്നതും ഇത്ര നേരം ഇരുന്നതും ഇനിയും ചെയ്യാമെന്ന് പറയുന്നത്. അപ്പൊ എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു അതെല്ലാവർക്കും യൂട്ടിലൈസ് ചെയ്യാം. രാജ്മോഹൻ സാറിന്റെ സഹായം ഇവിടെ വേണം എന്നുള്ളതാണ്. ഇവിടുന്ന് എന്നുള്ളതല്ല, രാജ്മോഹൻ സാർ ഈ ടീമിൽ പെട്ടതാണ്.
ഞാന് സർവകലാശാലയുടെ ഒരു ജീവനക്കാരനാണ്.
അതെ,
എന്റെ അടുത്ത് വൈസ് ചാൻസലർ പറയുന്ന എന്തും ചെയ്യാൻ ഞാൻ ബാധ്യസ്ഥനാണ്.
അങ്ങനെ തന്നെ വിളിച്ചതാണ് ഇത്.
ഓക്കെ, താങ്ക് യു.
തോമസ് ഐപ്പ് സർ.
എനിക്ക് പ്രത്യേകിച്ചൊന്നും പറയാനില്ല. നല്ല വെരി ഗുഡ് ഇനീഷ്യേറ്റീവ്. ഇറ്റ് ക്യാൻ ബി ടേക്കൺ ഫോർവേഡ് വിത്ത് ഷാജി സാർ, രാജ്മോഹൻ സാർ ആൻഡ് സുഭദ്ര മാഡം at the helm. I am sure it will go forward. Maybe more meetings may be needed to take it forward.
ഒരു കാര്യം കൂടെ പറഞ്ഞോട്ടെ. ബെന്നറ്റ് സാറിനെ ഇവിടെ വളരെ അപ്രതീക്ഷിതമായിട്ട് കണ്ടു. ഇത്രയും ദിവസവും 2 ദിവസവും ഇരുന്ന് വളരെ ക്ഷമയോടുകൂടി ഇരുന്ന് എല്ലാം പഠിച്ചതിലുള്ള ആ ഒരു ക്യൂരിയോസിറ്റി, ഇൻക്വിസിറ്റീവ്നെസ് സമ്മതിച്ചു. ആ ലേണിംഗ് മൈൻഡ്. ബിക്കോസ് നമ്മുടെ അധ്യാപകർക്കൊക്കെ ഉള്ള ഒരു കുഴപ്പം എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് നമുക്ക് എല്ലാവർക്കും ടീച്ചിങ് മൈൻഡ് ഒരുപാടുണ്ട്, പക്ഷെ ലേണിംഗ് മൈൻഡ് വളരെ കുറവാണ്. ഞാൻ ഉൾപ്പെടെ പറയുന്നത്. പക്ഷെ അത് ഒരു എക്സെപ്ഷൻ ആണ്. അത് ഐ ഷുഡ് അപ്രീഷിയേറ്റ് ദാറ്റ്. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അതൊരു അപരാധമായിട്ട് മാറും. അതുകൊണ്ട് പറഞ്ഞത്.
Thank you, sir. I have a passion towards this discipline. That's why.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So, is there any comments from the participant side, so that we can do it better, or we have to do what else, or what is the requirement from your side? Anything?
They should feel free to write to you also.
Yeah.
Later on.
Yeah, we would also add, as institutions which we represent, we should sow the seed, take its response, and get back to the university for it being nurtured.
Yes, thank you very much.
Anybody else want to talk, speak? As the time is running late, I think we can wind up the session. So formally, I am doing the Thanksgiving, because it was a very wonderful evenings we had together. We started with around 35 people, but now maybe due to the network issue and all, it is now only 21. But it was a very enlightened group, and I extend my sincere gratitude to Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Mohanan Kundumal sir, whose initiative was to do this program. In the first itself, he was very much inquisitive about what is going on with the program, how it will be done, who all will be there. And also I extend my gratitude towards PV Pro Vice Chancellor, Vijayan sir, and the other all statutory officers, and Headlal sir, and to the resource persons who were with us, Dr. Praveen Pai, Dr. Kichu Nair, who is not, he has gone, I think so, and Pradap Tirian sir, and also to the moderators who were with us, who gave us proper directions. Rajmohan sir, Shaji sir, Thomas Ait sir, Alka madam left earlier, I think so, and also Kichu sir, and also last but not the least, all the participants. From our side, we think we will be getting to you, you will be writing back to us, we will be getting to you with future plans to all those who wish to be with us and do something for the betterment of this group, not for this group, for the geriatric population. So I think we can wind up, because the time is running late. We had to wind up by 4:30, now it is 5 o'clock. So the group is not dead, it is active, it is started, it is in the infancy, it is starting to grow up. So with that, we can wind up. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rajmohan. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Rajmohan sir. Thank you all. Bennett, bye. Okay, I'm leaving. Bye.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. I am
Thanks a lot, Subhadra. You had ran a beautiful program. Thanks for the hard work and keep it up. We will collaborate and go forward. Excellent.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I am ending the session.
Okay.